GM Symposium. This is a place for game masters to connect, to learn, to level up. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Use the knowledge of these amazing presenters to help you. That's hopefully what you're here for and they're here for. We're going to be live streaming, so you won't be on camera, but your questions might. We also might have some chat questions that come through that my awesome partner Peter will be letting us know about as they come through. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Sharang Biswas, a fantastic artist, game designer, teacher, lecturer, amazing person. He has a slideshow for us. He just came back from Mexico, so he has, I think, some energy to share with us.
So I'm going to think after yeah, hi everyone, I'm Sharang Biswas. I just got back from Mexico. I participated in the Gay Games, which is games, not games. It used to be called the Gay Olympics, but then the Olympics sued them. And they're like, okay, we're changing our name. But the problem when I tell people gay games, like, oh, like queer gaming? I'm like, no. Queer sports. So they're like, you do sports? I'm like, I have started. I was sick flying back. It's very unpleasant flying sick on American Airlines, especially. At the Dallas airport, especially. I've tested 4 times, I don't have COVID. But there are other illnesses in the world, and I'm feeling fine now, so I shouldn't be transmitting. So I'm Sharang Biswas. I'm talking about introduction to GMing. This might not be a lot of new information for everyone, but we will refresh together. Also, there are a lot of people on stream. Hopefully, it will be new information for someone. Awesome. That's how to spell my name. I told you how to pronounce my name. People keep getting it wrong. I forgive you. I'm Sharang Biswas on all the major socials. And that is my website, which I just updated because I'm applying for a full professorship right now. Awesome. I have done a lot of work for a lot of different games, a lot of different properties. Most notably, I was one of the designers of the Avatar: The Last Airbender TTRPG called Avatar Legends. We just won 2 gold Ennies. I just won 2 gold Ennies. Cool. Actually won 3 Ennies this year, so that's awesome. I've also done stuff on Icewind Dale, and then I've done stuff like I was cultural consultant writer on Holy Festival of Color. So I've done lots of things for lots of different games. I've done a lot of independent, weird, tiny, bizarre role-playing games. I've done a lot of weird interactive theater LARP stuff. The big one is I did the Dark Crystal LARP at the Museum of the Moving Image, and Jim Henson's granddaughter said I was cool. So that was nice. She's like, "You're cool." I'm like, "You know who I am?" And she's like, "I'm like, someone briefed you well, but awesome." So that was awesome. I also write a lot about games. I also do a lot of fiction writing. I'm proud of that. That cover was directly about my story. And etc. Okay, so talking about intro to GM. So at the heart, at a basic level, a tabletop role-playing game consists of collaborative storytelling with rules, right? This can be like a distillation, like a basic, what is TTRPG? You can write a whole thesis on this. I have not, my colleagues have. But at some fundamental level, you can think of it this way, right? So if we break this down into collaborative storytelling and rules, this gives us a framework to consider, okay, well then what are some best practices by looking at these 3 points, which is exactly what we're going to do. Because every TTRPG person loves tables, I have decided, so another presenter agrees with me. So I've decided to make a table of GM advice using this framework of these 3 points. Collaborative storytelling with rules. Also, you couldn't believe how much time I took choosing my typeface. Because I change computer usually, and the proprietary typeface that one of the companies I used to work for is no longer on my laptop, so I cannot steal it anymore. So I took a long time choosing the typeface. Don't ask me what it's called, I forget. I went through too many typefaces. Okay, we're going to look at these 3 before the game, then we're going to look at it during the game, and we're going to look at it after the game. So hopefully this table will be easy to remember. My aim of this was like, this will be like a framework that you can like easily remember and recreate for yourself if necessary. If that doesn't work, sucks to be you. Okay. So let's start with before the game. Some of the best, maybe not best, but some good practices to implement before starting at the table. So, if we're talking about collaborative, the most important thing that we sometimes don't ever think about is establishing the role that the GM and the players have, right? Because different games and different GMing styles change this up. Do you guys know the X card mechanic? Right? So the X card mechanic is invented by John Stavropoulos, who's a game designer who lives in New York City. And he was telling me a story once where he was playing lots of different D&D games. He was playing specifically D&D 3rd edition with different tables around the city. And he went to one game and he was playing a character, he rolled some dice, he missed an attack. And he's like, okay, so I missed my attack. I swing my sword and it thunks into the wood. And the GM was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Why are you narrating your miss effect? That is my job as the GM, right? Now, personally, I'd be like, well, that's stupid. But that's me being judgy, right? That just happens to be that GM's GMing style, right? That GM likes to be able to narrate miss effects. And I should let that GM do that because remember, the GM is also at the table to have fun. And so if that GM has fun by narrating like what happens when you get bad dice rolls, great. Remember, the GM is not there. You, as a GM, are not there as like a vending machine of story for your players, right? You hopefully are getting something out of this yourself. Otherwise, do not do it because it is just sad. You'll just be like, right? So there, that GM style is I will narrate miss effects and things, right? And also, the game of Dungeons and Dragons affords that style, right? Because in Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of the presuppositions of the game is that the GM has some sort of overarching framework within which they are navigating the story, right? Other games give players a lot more narrative authority, right? And so, before the table, figure out what game are you playing. Well, obviously, hopefully you've chosen a game. But depending on what game you're playing, look at what narrative authority players have. I ran a game of 13th Age once with some people who work at the museum with me. I used to work at the Met. And one of the players was this like picture perfect like Southern belle. And she was one of the curators of the American wing. And so I'm like, you're gonna play D&D with me? She's like, I don't know anything about fantasy. I've never even watched Lord of the Rings. I'm like, excuse me? But she's like, no, I'm gonna do it. I'm like, you're amazing, Moira. And she comes up, and then I'm like, okay, so the troll, you're gonna attack the troll. She's like, and I take the cleaver, and I jump off that. I'm like, oh my god. And then she's like, and I chop the troll in half. And I'm like, wait. You do not chop the troll in half. You attempt to chop the troll in half because she was unaware of the conventions of the game, right? She's like, oh, I get to make a story, I'll say whatever I want, right? Which is fine in some games. Some games you can say that, right? But in others it's not. So establishing what authority different people have is early, and establishing what you want as a GM out of the game is also cool, right? I played in a streamed game in 2020 with a well-known GM named Tall Squall, and he loves monologuing at the start of the session in like a cool voice, describing the world and the story, and like it would have been really mean if in the middle of it I'm like, I slap the person talking, right? Because his role for him as a GM is I will always start by giving a very colorful just monologue about what he'd be like, and in the dark, the shadows lengthen, right? And as a player, some players are like, why am I watching a cutscene? I should be playing. But again, he likes doing that, and I'm like, he is a GM, he is someone getting something at the table too. I'm going to let him have his fun monologuing, right? So establishing that, because it's, remember, a collaborative process. What are the players and GMs getting at? Awesome. Then before, I was supposed to say all that on this slide. I have like a nice image after each thing to like hold your attention. So imagine I just did that. Also, I also did this because I want to introduce everyone to lots of different games. There's a game called Die by Kieran Gillen. It's published by Rowan Rick and Deckard, and I have this slide because this game asks the fundamental question of why do we play? And in this game, the GM has a character sheet and has like cheat tokens that they can use to like cheat in the game and things like that, right? So role, like what is the role of the GM versus the role of the player? Awesome. Also, it's also a good comic. So, okay. Second, before the game, so we have collaborative and we have storytelling. Is we talk about agreeing on the roles, but now we talk about agreeing on the fictions, right? So this is a game called Bluebeard's Bride. It is published by Magpie Games. It is by 3 different women. And this is a game self-described as feminist and feminine horror, right? This is a game which will probably touch on themes of abortion. It might touch on themes of intimate partner violence. It might touch on themes of marital rape, right? These are themes that are baked into this game. If I'm having a tabletop game session, I should tell my players, oh, we might be playing a game which is about intimate partner violence, right? Because not everyone wants to play a game about intimate partner violence. So agreeing with your players what is in the fiction is very important. This game is very playable without talking about, let's say, abortion, right? You could be like, okay, we're not going to talk about that theme. It is impossible to play this game without talking about women's trauma, for example, right? The theme of this game is about women's trauma. So agreeing with your players beforehand, what is our game about? What stories are we going to be telling is really important. I could run a game of Curse of Strahd, which is a famous Dungeons & Dragons module which has been repeated since the 2nd edition, I think. 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, board game version, which is not very good. I'll have Curse of Strahd, right? I can run a game of Curse of Strahd like, yay, vampires! I can also run a game of Curse of Strahd about queer tragedy. I can also run a game of Curse of Strahd about like disability and monstrosity, right? So having a discussion with your players beforehand, whether it's using very specific calibration tools and checklists like Montica Games has released, or just asking people, hey, do we want to play a game about queer tragedy, is very important that people know. When I played The Dark Eye, I was sponsored by the company that makes The Dark Eye to play a game of it. Our GM asked a question I'd never heard before, which is like, are you okay with your characters being betrayed? And I'm like, no. I don't want to be betrayed on this fun stream we're going to play for 10 weeks. I want to like fall in love with a hot leather worker and have fun times with him in downtime sessions. And she's like, great, no betrayal, right? Because that can be very emotionally affecting, that can ruin people's expectation, right? Similarly, there is a Pathfinder module where in the 3rd adventure, you end up in 19th century Russia, right? And you're like searching for Baba Yaga, and then you end up in literal Russia, and like Rasputin is a villain, right? Some people are like, yeah. Some people are like, I want medieval fantasy. I don't want to be in 19th century Russia, right? So again, agreeing what stories you're going to be playing beforehand, very important. Okay, awesome. And then again, before the game, the rules. The last thing is fairly simple. Know the rules, but don't swear, right? I am of the mindset that a game's rules are part of the artistic work that the game designer has created in order to create certain affect in the player. And so I tend to be like, let us try and play the rules as written. So going into a TTRPG, knowing the rules is usually a good thing. It allows you, because often like things will come up and people are like, wait, I'm not sure about this. So it'll help you do that. But also, don't sweat it, right? This is we talk about collaborative. You, again, are not a vending machine of game to your players, right? It is also somewhat the player's responsibility. And I'm using the word player versus GM, even though the GM is a player, but I'm using that because it's easy. It is also the other player's responsibility to keep up with the rules. So if, for example, you're playing a game where each character has lots of really complicated separate rules, like die, for example, each character sheet works completely differently. It's not up to you to memorize everything. You might have to ask the players, what does your power do? Please tell me, right? But it is a good idea as a GM to be familiar with the rules as a whole, or to remember, like put bookmarks in your books, like, oh yeah, I don't know all the different tables of radiation effects, but it is on page 25. I have a bookmark in there. Open table of radiation effects. Like, oh, you seem to have grown a second set of feet. Can't totally keep this PG. Yeah, know the rules, but again, don't sweat it. You're not being quizzed unless you are, unless like Silviana's at the table. She's teaching the advanced GM. But she's very nice. She will not judge you. She's not going to judge you, exactly. Yeah, so don't sweat it. You're not being quizzed on rules. If you mess up, I've been running a game of Agon for 7 sessions, and yes, last week I'm like, oops, I forgot this rule the entire session. This entire campaign. Doesn't matter, no one cares. Right? Awesome. This is from Spire. By Rowan Rickendecker. This is specifically from the adventure that I wrote for Spire called House of Leaving. Great. Oh yeah, and I picked Spire for this slide because Spire is about rebellion. You play a rebellious group in a oppressed society. So rules, but like, awesome. Okay, so that was our before the game, okay? Establish the roles, make sure you know who has narrative authority and what you're doing as GM. Also, like, remember, you don't have to do all the labor as GM. You can be like, I don't want to take session notes. You take session notes because I'm too busy coming up with the session, right? Agree on the fictions you are playing with and the content of what those fictions are. And then know the rules, but don't like freak out that, oh my god, I don't know all the reflective damage off of silvered mirrors table rules, right? Like, forget that, okay? Wait. Also, Silviana is very nice. I didn't mean to be mean. Okay.
I don't need you to defend me, Sharang.
She's getting married soon. Yay! Okay, so now, second, during the game. Collaborative. While you're running the game, usually you're going to be playing with more than a couple of players. You might be playing a 2-player RPG, you might be playing a 3-player RPG, in which case this is less important. But if you're playing with more than one player, you will want to make sure you are shining the spotlight on everyone. And this is important because people have different personalities. Some people, like myself, like talking a lot. Some people are going to be like, oh, that person's talking a lot. I guess it's my turn to be quiet. Even though they want to speak, right? But they're like, oh no, I'll be nice and let that person speak, right? That's one reason, because people have different personalities. But two, your game will be richer if everyone contributes, right? I was once at Dreamation convention in Jersey. I once, because of various reasons, I ended up at the table of Numenera with 2 players. And it was so hard because I had so few players to provide creative input. I was like pulling stuff out of my gullet constantly, and I'm like, oh my god, what else am I going to say, right? So shining the spotlight on people is really important. So what does this mean? This means if someone's talking a lot, you can be like, awesome, but I want to hear what Dhurandhar Bhadawadekar here wants to say, right? You are now Dhurandhar Bhadawadekar. And then get their opinion, right? It also means eliciting information from the players, right? So the players meet, I don't know, the sexy pirate king Uria, whatever, I think I his last name, from Lady Blackbird. And you can ask the players, okay, you're seeing this dashing figure for the first time. He is Indian, he has wavy long hair. He has amazing nails.
Yes.
Tell me, Silviana, what does your character think of this dashing figure? And let Silviana's character tell you like, oh, well, I think he's so smart and so hot, and I'd be happy to be invited to look at his bedroom, right? Elicit things from players, and they can be even small things like that, right? Like, what is your opinion of the character? Or you arrive at the castle, and you can ask this leading questions like, what about this castle is scary? And they're like, there is no Sharang in there, right? Get things. I'm extremely big-headed. Okay, just so you all know. It comes from being a professor. No, it comes from being me. Elicit information from players is an easy way to get spotlight, right? It doesn't have to be like, what is your character doing? Which obviously I would also recommend. Like, tell them, okay, what is your character doing? What is your character doing? But sometimes just asking their opinion, like you're at this bar, what do you think of the beer at this bar? Like, it tastes like I'm a dwarf. We make much better beer. This human beer is awful. Or I'm a dwarf. We have no idea what beer is. We only drink lava. So trying to drink this is hideous, right? Why is it less than 1,000 degrees, right? So shining spotlight, giving moments to every player is a very important thing. It'll keep everyone involved, but it'll also make your job easier because every player will add to the fiction. Okay, so everyone is collaborating. Awesome. I was supposed to say that during this. Again, I'm really bad at this, right? This is The Strange. And The Strange is interesting. It's a multi-cut game because you travel between universes. Some of them are fantasy, some of them are not fantasy, some of them are science fiction. And your characters change every time you travel a universe. And so I went spotlight on what each character is doing. I'll be better at going to the right slide. It's fine. I'm foreign. Okay. For a few more months. Okay. Now, storytelling, doing the game, storytelling. Remember, you are telling the stories together. You're not just GMing. I think some people who don't know about gaming are you're doing tax accounting, right? You're just looking at tables of numbers. I'm like, have you played any of the games I've made? There are no numbers in them. But an important thing, remember, is you're building this fictional world and you're building a fictional narrative, right? Fictional, yeah. And so adding color can really help with that, right? It's not just about the sequence of events, it's also about the context within which the events take place that create emotional affect, right? So there's a game by Possum Creek Games, by Jay Dragon, called Wander Home. And the vibes of Wander Home are all about Redwall, right? Where cute woodland creatures doing cute woodland things all the time, right? And the way you create the feel of this game is by describing cute woodland things, right? If the player's like, okay, we're gonna camp for the night, right? You can say, great, you camp for the night, you wake up, you're fresh. But you want to create vibes of cute woodland creatures? Great, great, you camp for the night. Silviana's character, what are you doing to set up for the camp? And she will say something. Durandar Bhadawadikkar's character, what cozy home-cooked meal are you making for everyone else, right? So details, you can again elicit the details, you can also give the details, right? Like my monologuing GM, who's a very good GM by the way, you could be great, you sit down for the night and you look up at the stars, and even though they're unfamiliar stars because you've traveled long from home, the fact that the stars still form shapes that you can recognize comforts you and makes you think about how all of Woodlandia looks up at the sky, and we are all linked by the fact that we can see symbols among the stars and we are guided by them. Right? These small descriptive things you say, even if it's something like travel montage, right? You're traveling and you can say, great, on your travel you step on a pink bug and it's stinky, right? These kinds of descriptive, colorful details. When someone swings a sword, the enemy dodged it. The enemy can also trip on their overly long cloak and yelp, but because they tripped, the sword flew over their head, right? What does that show? That shows both the player missed, but it also shows that the enemies are incompetent, right? So these kinds of colorful details can add a lot to the context of the story that creates the vibes, that creates the world, that creates the mood that players inhabit through their roleplay. Awesome. And then with rules during the table is let them use their toys, right? I can't describe how many times I've seen things on Twitter and someone's like, oh yeah, my players learned Fireball. Now I'm gonna only make them fight fire elementals. We're immune to Fireball. And I'm like, you're a terrible DM, right? Because players are playing these games, the progression and advancement mechanics in these games are part of the power fantasy that these games provide. If the game doesn't have progression and power fantasies, it still gives players tools to do things, and players want to do those things, right? Why would a designer work so hard to give the player the ability to summon dragons, and then you're like, no, but now you can't, I'm making the enemies immune to dragons. Like, what's the point of that, right? So, give the players the ability and opportunity to use the tools at their disposal. Whatever mechanics are available, give them opportunity to use that. If they tell you, oh, can I use this thing in this situation? Like, I don't know, let's say they're fighting ghosts, and they're like, oh my god, can I use my new telekinetic power? And earlier on, you're like, yeah, these ghosts can only be affected by holy magic. But this new player learned how to do telekinesis, and they want to use it. It'll be kind of silly to be like, nope, no telekinesis power possible, sorry. You should be like, yes, telekinesis is one of the few things that will affect these ghosts. Good job, right? You thought of this. Because the players want to use what they have. Monster Hearts is famous for it's like teen monsters in high school, right? Every teen monster has a sex move, which is when you have sex, XYZ happens. If you're running a Monster Hearts and someone's like, great, I want to try and seduce someone, so I'm going to have sex with them, and then you say no, then you're literally not letting them use one of the major things on their character sheet, right? Players want to use what is on their character sheets, and you should encourage them and let them, and when they come up with situations where they want to use things on their character sheet, be like, amazing, amazing, you're so clever, right? And then they'll be happy. Okay, so let them use their choices. During the game, collaborative, make sure you shine spotlight on everyone, which includes you, right? You get to do your monologue. You get to do the haha, the villain arrives and looks sexy like me, and gets to say all that stuff. And if the players interrupt you and keep annoying you, be like, dude, I'm trying to do a monologue here. Let me do it, right? You can say that. Add color to enhance your storytelling. And let players use their toys, because that's why they're playing a game with rules. Otherwise, they'd just be there telling campfire stories, right? Which is also fun, right? If you like campfires. Great. Okay. And then finally, after the game. So, collaborative. First off, debriefing. This is from Avatar Legends, which I helped design, so please buy a copy. I get one of these. I put this slide because, like, yay, let's share some tea together. At the end of a session, something I've been doing a lot is asking people, great, what were the highlights of the session? But more importantly, every player, tell me something fun that another player did, right? And this is good because it makes people reflect on their own play, which enhances enjoyment. Like if you spend time thinking about a thing that was fun, you will have more fun. You will, at the end, remember more of the fun. You'll be like, oh yeah, that was fun. Oh my god, yeah. So ask people at the end of the session, well, what was fun, what was good, and you can you'll maybe in the advanced and the post-advanced stuff and talk about like other techniques about debriefing and things. But it's a good idea, just simply at the end, like, what was fun about today's session? Highlights, or what did other people do that was fun? Highlights. That will help people have their own fun. It'll also help remember things that you might have forgotten that were important. That, oh right, we did steal that thing. Huh, that could be significant. Right, it'll help you remember those kind of things. Okay. Then, in storytelling, reincorporation. So, you're probably going to take some notes as a GM. You're going to be like, oh yeah, the players did this. they really annoyed Madame Bovary, Madame Zostra, that's from Betrayal Math, and they stole this thing, and they made the hot pirate king fall in love with them, etc. At the end of the session, it's a good idea to be like, great, what did the players do? And the recap that they did in what we just talked about is helpful for that. What can I bring back into the next session? Because players love to feel that the stuff they did has narrative weight. And we know this from video games, right? You're playing a video game, you did this thing, you're playing Baldur's Gate, for example. You did this thing, and then later Astarion comments on it, and you're like, oh, Astarion remembered. Little old me. Now, will he please have sex with me? He doesn't want to sex with me. I'm too nice. I'm too nice. I hate this. I have to go with Gale instead. Gale. He's like basically straight. But reincorporation is very powerful, right? And advanced tactics that Silviana might talk about is reincorporation within a session. That can be challenging because you have a lot to manage. But at the end of a session, we see, well, what did players do? How can I bring that back into there, even in small ways, right? They go to the bar the next time, and the bartender's like, oh my God, you seduced that person? Props to you, right? That kind of thing can be very, very powerful. This is from Brindlewood Bay, a game by Jason Morningstar, and I bring this up because Brindlewood Bay has mechanics where the GM does not know the solution to the mystery, the author does not know the solution to the mystery, the players use the clues they've come up with and create the solution to the mystery, right? So they reincorporate. They're like, oh yeah, we found a cigarette butt. Sure, let's say that Madame Bovary was a smoker. Great, she's a suspect, right? So reincorporation, this game makes you reincorporate, but whatever game you're playing, at the end of a session, look at what happened and be like, great, can I take 2 of the things they did and bring them back the next session? They obviously did a lot of things, but let me take 2 of them and be like, they chased away a cat and they killed the lich. Okay, they killed the lich. Big things. All the undead in this town now go insane. Amazing. They chased away the cat. Oh no, the cat's owner, the little girl, hates them now, which means the mayor hates them now. Dun dun dun. Right? So reincorporation. And then finally, this might be slightly advanced. I'm going into Silviana's territory here. This idea of making and stealing. So first off, if a rule in a game does not exist, usually it means that it's either impossible or is super easy for players to do. Okay? So for example, if you play Masks, which is a game of teen superheroes, there is no mechanic to investigate, to search, right? Which means when players ask me, I search, I'm like, great, you succeed, right? You find, obviously I don't just say that, like, I want to search through, like, great, in one corner, you find an incriminating thought, whatever, right? You find it, it's covered in blood, oh no, it must be the bloody thong thief, the villain, right? So, that's the thing, right? If the rule doesn't exist, usually it means the game like is either impossible for them to do, or it's super easy for them to do, right? Obviously it's not impossible for my superheroes to investigate, so it's super easy for them to do. But if you feel that there's a mechanic in the game that is not there, that the players are trying something and you're like, well, you know what, I really need them to roll dice for this, whatever, just make up. Just be like, okay, just roll me some dice and give me what the result is, right? Decide by yourself, what the rule for that is, right? And later, you might have to be inconsistent. You might be like, oh, I made a bad call there. Just tell your players, yeah, this doesn't work if you keep doing this, so we're going to change that rule because I made it up on the fly. We're going to change this now, right? And the player's like, wah, it worked last time. Just like, guys, we're playing a collaborative story. If you keep exploding everyone, this game will not work. So you are no longer allowed to explode people. Okay, even if you did it last time, we're going to call it a fluke. Your magic surged within you and you exploded someone. Great, no more. Okay, so you can make up the rule. You can also steal bits from other games. That's what I'm talking because it's kind of advanced. If you like. So I was running a game of Strixhaven, which is a 5th edition campaign, and there's a whole sports thing in there, like the magic school sports, and I'm like, well, the rules of the sports in this book are shite. the campaign is fun, but this is not. So I went to this game, Fight with Spirit by Story Brewers, which is an RPG about anime sports teams. And I'm like, I'm gonna steal the sports mechanics from this game and plump it into our D&D game. And the players were like, yay, so fun. Also, all my players like anime, so. I was honestly the least experienced anime in our team. But, again, so stealing and making things up when they don't exist is totally acceptable. Though again, you don't always have to do it. Sometimes you can just be like, you succeed, you do this thing, right? You don't need to make your own mini game, mini subsystem for everything, right? Especially if it's like stacking inventory, right? No one likes stacking inventory, they just do it. Okay, cool. So, after the table, for collaborative, check in with your players, debrief, what was good, tell me what you enjoyed. For storytelling, look at what the players did and reincorporate it into your next session. Not everything, take 2 things they did and reincorporate them. And finally, it's okay to make things up, it's fine. And it's okay to steal things from other games. There's no game police coming and like, I mean, unless you're like being paid by a company to stream a game, then you can't do that. But at your home table, you can do whatever you want. No one cares, right? You can have your thong bandit and do whatever. That is our amazing table of GM advice along the axes of time, before, during, and after, and along the axis of definition of a role-playing game, a collaborative storytelling with rules. That image is from John Harper's Blaze in the Dark, which is one of my favorite RPGs. Hopefully, even if you don't have a copy of this or whatever, you'll be able to rebuild this by knowing the definition of a role-playing game is collaborative storytelling with rules, a definition of role-playing game. And then going across time, you can fill this out yourself and be like, yes, I remember the advice that incredibly handsome GM told me in Manhattan one day, and I was too distracted because he was so handsome. But now I can rebuild this myself. Awesome. That was that. I am Sharang. That is me in Magic University. Go run game! Then you may now applause. Awesome. I forgot my watch. How much time do I have?
15 minutes.
15 minutes of questions. I'm so good at this. Almost as though I'm paid to give lectures. Awesome. Question.
How do you deal with players trying to veer very far off of the story?
Tell them you're veering very far off the story. People forget that players are humans and you can talk to players as though they're humans. So you can, like, you know, a lot of old school things will be like, well, you navigate this way and put roadblocks. You can also be like, hey guys, that's veering really far away. So one of my friends, so Sarah Dark Magic, very involved in 4th edition D&D stuff, she told me a story about how last week they were like, okay, we're gonna go assault the temple of the Dark Lord, whatever, next week. And she's like, great, if you know anything about 4th edition D&D, it's very tactics based. And the GM has to like build encounters and it's a lot of work, right? And so the next week came and then they were like, actually we want to do this thing instead. And she's like, guys, no. We all have full-time jobs. I made this enormous dungeon adventure for you. You are going into the dungeon adventure because I made it and I cannot make something else on the fly for you right now, right? It is totally acceptable to tell your players, hey guys, it's kind of a dick move if you do that. I've planned the thing. Of course, that depends. Some games you can easily do that, right? Some games you can be like, oh yeah, sure, don't do that, whatever. But some games you can be like, hey, I have designed 10 encounters in this dungeon just for you for this week. Please do that. Some games, you can be like, oh great, you're not gonna go in the dungeon? Great, where are you gonna go? Great. But the game gives you tools. So if you're playing Urban Shadows, for example, right? Urban Shadows is an urban politics supernatural game. In Urban Shadows, you plan as a GM what the factions are plotting, right? The Fae are trying to turn Central Park into a gateway to Arcadia. The vampires are setting up an underground drug ring. The werewolves are planning an orgy, right? That's what werewolves do. If the players are like, well, we're not going to assault the stronghold of the wizards, which is Columbia, great, they can do something else, awesome. So you as a GM are like, okay, they're veering off course, but what does this mean the factions do? Well, they're not assaulting Columbia, that means the wizards are going to get stronger. The wizards saying this, what happens the wizards get stronger? The Fae get angry, the Fae now send the hobgoblins up to Columbia, and all the students get boils. Whatever, right? So some games allow you to do that, and you should do it. Be like, okay, the players are doing something else, in which case I will see how does my world react to what this new decision is, and then I can move forward with that. And it's okay to be like, oh, let's take a 5-minute break, guys. Go pee. I will do some planning and do some planning. That's totally acceptable. Again, players are humans. You are humans. Hopefully they are your friends. They will understand if you need to take a break or make a change or whatever. Does that help? Good.
How do you get like the first startings of like brand new people? Specifically, I want to run games for younger people. How do you get people involved in what like games you're running? Like, how do you get them to A, sit down, and B, like engage, basically?
Yeah. So I think if you are a GM and people don't want to play your game, that's a fundamental problem, right? Because all the advice I'm giving is assuming that people are at your table to play games with you. That's a difficult phrase. It's like saying like, how do I get people to listen to my poetry?
What if they don't know yet they want to play?
Okay. I think you will want to tell them about what is fun about this game, right? You want to be like, okay, in this game, if you're younger people, right? If you're like, you're 12 years old, this is a game where you get to play. You know, Lord of the Rings. You like Lord of the Rings, or what's popular now among kids these days? I don't know. I don't know. But you're wise. Silviana's very wise.
Same age, Sharang.
But you're wise, and I'm foreign. Okay. For 3 moments. Yeah, you can be like, oh, well, you like, I don't know, My Hero Academia, right? You like My Hero Academia? Great. We're going to play this game called Masks, where you play teenage superheroes, right? You get to play your My Hero Academia fantasy. Oh, you like movies? Well, what if you get to be in the movie and you get to make the decisions? Or you like video games? You like, I don't know, Diablo 4? Great. Well, what if we're doing that, but with your imagination, so you're not limited just to the graphics of the game, right? So I would say, tell people like what they might find fun about the game, relate it to other media or other activities that they might enjoy, and also tell them, also, this is something new. A lot of people like it. You might like it, right? That's how I got into athletics. My ex-husband was like, a lot of people in the world like athletics, right? I'm like, fine, I'll give it a try. Right? So yeah, I would say try and highlight what is interesting, and hopefully they will like that. Ultimately, if they don't like it, they don't like it. Right? I hope that helped.
Yeah, that helped.
Yeah.
For your before the game,
Yeah.
what are some recommendations on how to lay the groundwork? Like explain the rules to the players and explain what the lines are, agree on fictions, etc. Is it like a session 0? Like a
I think it depends on tables, right? So like, and it depends on your relation to the people. Some people really like, here is a consent checklist, right? Have this form. Fill out which of these things you want or not to appear. Some people are violently allergic to consent checklists, right? They're like, that seems gross. I just want to talk to my players and be like, what are you into? What are you not into? Do you want a game with kissing? Do you want a game with no kissing, right? So I think it totally depends, and I think you should, if you know your players, which you might, you should engage with them as though they're your friends, right? Be like, hey, you are my friends. What kind of game do you want? What do you like? Sometimes it's helpful to be like, do we want the game to be epic like Lord of the Rings? Or do we want it to be goofy like Honor Among Thieves, right? Do we want it to be vampires like What We Do in the Shadows? Or do we want it to be vampires like Caramel, right? So I think different groups have what they like, but yeah, so that's, I mean, one of the issues is that I think a lot of people are like, this is the way you need to set boundaries and ground rules in games, and everyone must do it this way. And one of the reasons we get people who are like, why do we even need to do that, is because people are like, this is the only way of doing things. That's not true, right? Some groups don't set any boundary at the start, but as they come up in game, they might be like, hey, let's not have a graphic torture scene right now. I don't really want to hear you describe pulling someone's spleen out. Right? Great. Move on with that, right? Some groups handle it that way. I will say it's usually a good idea to at least give your players a chance to be like, hey, we're playing a fantasy monster game. It could get violent, it could get ghostly, whatever. Is there anything you don't like seeing? And remember, there's an opportunity in the game to always tell me in the middle, hey, I really don't want to deal with racism. That's gross, I deal with it all the time. Or to tell me, hey, I really want to deal with racism because I want to undergo emancipatory bleed that Janaya Kemper writes about, read an article. And I really want to have the experience of fighting against real world oppression in this game about elves, right? Both those are valid. And some people want that in, some want that before, but give players the opportunity at least early to do it before. I don't like, when I'm a GM, I don't like having a separate session 0 because I like jumping into the game. So I will do the session 0 stuff and then also jump into the game in the same session, right? Because I like jumping into the game. So, does that help?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you.
How would you recommend dealing with disagreements at the table? Like ideally we're all friends, but you know,
Yeah.
sometimes we have new people or strangers and personalities don't always mesh well.
Yeah, I think that answer is how do you deal with when your friends fight in general, right? Like, well, your friends are breaking up. Oh God, how do I deal with this, right? Your friends both want to go to the top bunk in the cabin. How do you deal with this, right? And the answer is you have to be like, hey guys, let's pause. It seems like we're getting angry. It seems like things are getting heated. Let's take a break. Can I talk to you? Are you okay? What is up? Can I talk to you? Are you okay? What is up? What's happening here? I think that's the I think we have to be adults about this and just be like, we are doing a collaborative story in order to have fun. So what is making you upset and can we rectify this, right? And remember, it is much more important for your players to feel like you're all together having fun than whatever weirdness happening in the fiction, right? So if they're like, no, we have to kill her because she is a threat to society. No, we cannot kill her. The value of one life is more important than the value of a whole society. Why would we do that? And there's a real anger moment about the fiction. Pause and be like, guys, there's a fiction. What is wrong? Why are we getting upset? What are we getting very emotional about this? I recognize your feelings. They are valid feelings because people always feel strongly about fiction. This is how human nature works. There's a story. How do we deal with this? Is it really important to you to kill this princess because it seems like it'll upset this person? Is it really important to you to not kill this princess? It seems like it'll upset this person. Worst case, oh no! The princess is transformed into a vampire and flies away. Right? Ultimately, it's more important that your players are having good, because you're there to have a good time, right? You're not earning money by doing this, right? You're not there at the table every minute you play, you earn $10 million, right? So pause, discuss what is wrong, why are you upset? It is valid to be upset. It is not okay to tell people you're being stupid, or it's just a game. That can be incredibly frustrating for someone to hear. In Critical Play, Mary Flanagan writes that within the magic circle of the game, regardless of the truth value of what is happening, the fiction value of what is happening, the stakes will feel real to a player, right? You've all encountered someone turning over the Monopoly board, right? Everyone knows it's just a game. Even that person knows it's just a game, right? But within that is the power, the transportive power of games that makes fictional stakes feel real, right? So it's unhelpful to tell someone it's just a game. It is helpful to be like, hey guys, we're playing a game in order to have fun. What is up here? Can we unpack this? What will make this more fun for everyone? Because ultimately that's what matters. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool, thank you.
It does not help to tell a person it's just a game, you're overreacting. Then they will get even more annoyed at you. Awesome.
I
I've been to, and maybe this is mostly when you're playing with strangers. I've been to a lot of,
Sorry, did you say when you're playing with straight
mostly
people?
when you're playing with like people you don't know that
Oh,
well.
strangers.
I've been to a lot of like initial games and LARPs and other things where we do like kind of like a safety speech.
Yeah.
Where, like anyone can speak at any time. We do this for like 5 minutes and
Yeah.
no one ever does ever.
Yeah.
And so what I've started doing to like convince people that it's okay is I just like I X out arbitrary things of like I don't want eye torture today or I don't want to deal with like drowning. Even though I
Amazing.
don't have an opinion on that. Like, do you have any other suggestions to like get people to like speak up? Because I think people don't, especially new players, they don't realize that anything can happen. So you should speak about it.
Yeah.
They've never thought about this before.
Game designer James Stewart does a thing where the first person to tell me not to include something, I'm gonna buy them a drink.
Great.
Which is very fun because he bought me a drink once. So I would say that's a very good example of modeling it. So you can be like, okay, anyone have any thoughts? Great. Well, I will give mine. I always have one that I always give anyway, which is like I don't want an omnipotent, omniscient deity to exist in this game, right? Because then why would we have any problems ever? I always say that, for example. It's like, oh, okay. And then tell people, and if you use your calibration tool, I will buy you a drink or whatever, right?
So the example you gave there was pretty good too, because like I think sometimes people struggle with, does it have to be something very serious and traumatic
Yes.
that I want to prevent? And it
Yeah.
should be like light, just like
Yeah, it
this
doesn't.
would be annoying to
Another
me.
example I often give, especially when I'm running a fantasy game, is, for example, if character B starts talking about phasers and cloaking devices, you might X-card that. You might be like, that's not in the tone and theme of what we're playing. I would rather not have robots and phasers in my 13th age game, for example. So it's a good idea to also get it. You don't have to just be like, X-card like molestation, right? No, you can X-card all kinds of things. You can X-card, I'm an airline steward. I don't want to think about work. Let's not go to a plane, please. I just don't want to think about work. That kind of thing is fine too. I'm not an airline steward. That was an example. That happened to me once at a bondage assessment recently. Where someone was like, don't ask me about work. I'm like, oh, but I want to know what airline you work for. No. I'm like, oh, okay. Awesome. Other thoughts, questions?
Just going back to disagreements at the table a little bit. What if it's a rules disagreement, not like a philosophical or moral?
Yeah. So a rules agreement, usually I'm like, can we look this up in a reasonable amount of time in the book? And that you have to judge what is reasonable. And if you cannot, you'll be like, you know what? We're just gonna roll it. We're gonna make things up and don't sweat the rules. Use both those principles, right? We're not gonna sweat the rules. What seems logical and reasonable in this case for me to do, we're gonna just roll a d20. You got higher than 15, you succeed, right? Whatever that was, right? And again, if later they're like, oh, but it worked last time, you're like, guys, are we doing taxes? No. We're not trying to win at this. We're trying to play our game, right? Constraints and rules in the game exist to provide imaginative support and allow you to feel emotional affect, right? We're not trying to win at D&D. The lich cannot touch me because last time you told me I can do this thing. I'm like, well, you're a dumb bomb. If you can look it up in a reasonable amount of time, go with it. If you're at a convention, for example, no amount of time is reasonable because you only have 3 hours. Just be like, oh, I'm gonna rule this. Does that seem fair to everyone? Ask. Don't just be like, I am GM. I have laid down the law because the blood of Gary Gygax runs through my veins, right? So be like, okay, I think what's best for our storytelling is it'll be very stupid if by blinking of the vampire he dies. So we're gonna make him immune to your blink power. Does that work for everyone? So you can actually have a good fight with the vampire? Amazing, done. So that's usually what I would do. Good question, organizer. Okay, other questions? Any questions on chat? No? Great, amazing. Any other questions, comments, or explosions of emotion?
How do you prepare for a one-shot?
How to prepare for one shot? Usually for one shot, you have to be a lot more, well, it depends. It always depends, so that's a dumb answer. It always depends on who you're playing with, right? If I'm playing with Ken, I'm like, well, anything I throw at Ken will be fine. But in Silviana, anything I throw at Silviana will be fine and make something fun out of it, right? But usually I make semi-pregens for whatever game system I'm using, unless a big part of the game is making the character, which some games they are. But I make semi-pregens where I make most of the decisions. I make all the mechanical decisions at least, and then I'm like, okay, choose one of these 3 things. I make semi-pre-gens, and I have usually a stronger framework for what's going on in the background of the plot, right? And usually I have a contained situation, so I won't be like, you need to save this religion from extinction. What do you do? Right? It's more like, you need to save religion from extinction. The priest is in the monastery locked in debate. You need to make sure that the demons don't attack, right? A contained situation, semi-pre-gens, handouts are very good in one shot. Like have note cards and write down things. Handouts are good. Yeah, what else can I do in one shots?
Is it okay if I add something to that?
Add something to that,
I do a
Silviana,
lot of
of
one
advanced
shots.
GMing.
Well, no, this is not an advanced GMing thing, but I do a lot of one-shots, and I definitely had that problem. And my best advice is make sure all the characters know each other.
Yeah.
And that they have something in common that will make them want to stay together and go on this adventure. Whether they're family members, or they all work for the same employer.
That's the
whatever it
easiest
is.
one, you work for the same employer.
Yeah, you work for the same employer. So it's really easy for the players in their minds at the beginning to say, okay, this adventure that you're telling me about, yes, my character wants to do that with these other people. You save so much time at the beginning of the session.
Oh yeah, and on that note, start in media res when you're doing a one-shot, right? So when I'm doing, I ran a one-shot for my gay triathletes 2 months ago. And I was like, okay, it's a haunted house adventure, but rather than be like, okay, so you're in the tavern, and the person comes to you, hey, I have a haunted house adventure for you. Then you spend 5 years debating should they do the adventure or not, right? No. When I run that adventure, the moon rises and the house in front of you looks, I don't know, like a corpse of a castle, right? Sister Inez besides you is like, thank you for accepting this adventure. You're the only ones who can do this. That's the gate. And then don't be like, you stand in front of the gate, what do you do? Be like, the gate door opens automatically. There's a wailing inside. Start that way. Because, and this is not a fault of players. Players will want to play, right? And part of play is social interactions, right? And if you spend time making a character, because I made a dwarven slut, right? They'll want to play their dwarven slut. I'm thinking of Lucian. They will want to play their dwarven slut. So if you give them time in a tavern, they're like, great, I want to flirt with the barmaid. And that will slow down your game, right? So yeah, give them a reason to do the thing at the start. And I always, when I start a game, I always tell my player, one shot or not, I always tell my players, this game will not work if you guys are sociopaths, right? Your characters want to do good in this world. Otherwise, this game won't work. Unless, of course, we're playing, I don't know, Undying, right? Then we're all sociopaths. But give them a reason to be together. Tell them that you want to do good. You're not going to be playing characters who are not doing good. And start in media res and not like, so you meet at a tavern. And that's a terrible way to start a one-shot. It's a fine way to start a campaign if you're prepared to have 3 sessions of just them in the tavern.
Look, if the one shot is that you're temps who are hired to run
Yeah,
the tavern for the
amazing.
night, you can start
Right.
with you meet at a tavern.
Or if you're playing, what's that game? That game where you are taqueria chefs hunting Spanish angels to serve to other Mexicans because they are a colonizing force. And you're like, angels? We must hunt them and sell them for meat. What's the game called? I forget. It's by Miguel Espinosa. Then you can do that. Awesome. Good question. Oh, no, that wasn't the question. Good question. Final question. You had a hand up.
Okay, I did have a hand up, and the question is kind of the inverse of how do you prepare a one-shot, which is what do you do if half the table just doesn't show up? Do you specifically have like an in pocket?
Yeah. Well, first off, I always confirm the morning of. Like, hey guys, are we still on for the game today? Because people have very busy lives. We all live in New York. People have busy lives. We also all have executive dysfunction. After going through COVID for 3 years, executive dysfunction is a thing. So sometimes people will need nudges like, hey guys, we're playing tomorrow. I'm excited. And don't be like, are you coming? Can you even be like, hey guys, I'm excited about tomorrow. Yay! That gives people rather than being who's coming and who's not, it gives people a way to, oh right, let me tell Sharang now that I can't come. So that's one thing, like plan early to do that kind of thing. That's good. Then if like people can't come suddenly, something happened, oh no, my car broke down, my cat is sick, whatever, and when people are there, I either do things like, let's do like fun flashback stuff, let's go into your backstory, and those can also be, if you're playing a game which has a lot of crunchy rule stuff, those sessions can be light on the mechanics sometimes. So that's a really helpful thing to do. Another helpful thing is, let's play a side adventure, like last year, you were on a side mission, one shot. You can do that kind of thing. Also, sometimes, and I've done this with friends when I was not DM, for example, where we're like, oh, people can't come last minute, some emergency happened. Who wants to play a board game today, right? Because remember, ultimately, the thing is to have fun with your friends, right? So it's okay to be like, oh, not everyone's here. Sometimes it's okay to just continue. But if not enough people are there to do that, be like, you know what? This is great, we're going to play a board game, or we're going to play another game as our characters. Like, imagine if we're playing Good Society, which is a game about Jane Austen drama, but as these characters, like as analogs of these characters to help develop our characters more. Those kinds of things can be extremely fun. Or play For the Queen. Literally just pull out a copy of For the Queen, which is answering prompts, but as our characters, right? That's useful. Awesome. Thank you everyone for your questions and comments. Thank you everyone.
Thank you so much, Sharang.
Yeah, thank you for the gift of your attention. That's super valuable.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for everything, all this knowledge. The party continues. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back in for our advanced section with our amazing Silviana Russo.
Yay!
We have food. We have drinks. We also hope to have some more people on chat. We'll see. Have your questions ready. But thanks again, Sharang. Thanks, everybody. our advanced GM. Please give it up for Silviana Russo, actual play producer, awesome GM. Thank you, Silviana.
Hello, everyone. I'm Silviana Russo. I am a GM and actual play producer, and I'm going to give a presentation on advanced GMing. It's a broad topic. I feel like intro GMing can kind of be one session. Advanced GMing would probably be like 20 sessions. I'm only going to do one of them. So I'm going to try to focus a bit on the topics of how to make the player characters the protagonists of the story, which I think is an advanced topic. It's usually not something that people do the first couple times they GM. And in the context of that, how to make your home game, like you're GMing, an actual play. Because this is kind of an intimate space, I'm happy to take questions during the presentation. If there are things you have questions about you want to discuss, we can chat. Feel free to interrupt me. Happy to take questions from Twitch chat during the presentation too, if any come up. This can be a discussion between us. It doesn't just have to be me standing up here talking at you. I have a bunch of slides. I didn't know how big the screen was going to be. If you have trouble reading them, it's not that important. I'm going to say it all anyway. So don't worry about it. Okay. So I'm an actual play producer. I've produced shows like Kolak. You may have heard of it. Slasher Town. The Panic Table, premiering December 4th. Very exciting. I'm usually a story producer. So I work with the GM to craft the story with them, and we meet in between every session to figure out what is going to happen next, where we want to take the story, where we want to take the characters. I am usually behind the scenes. If it's a live show, I have a secret chat with the GM where we're talking to each other during the show while it's happening. So I produce the story while the show's happening. I do other stuff too. Sometimes I also GM actual plays. I've done campaigns and one-shots, but I'm usually the producer. If people have questions at the end about like how to produce an actual play, I'm happy to talk about that towards the end of the session if people have questions. I've done it a lot. Okay. So today we're going to talk about how to GM your home game like it's an actual play. People often ask me, is there a difference? If you're GMing just for your friends, or you're GMing a show on Twitch or YouTube or whatever, do you do things differently? And I usually say no, which surprises them, because they say, oh, you just GM an actual play the way that you would GM at home. No, I GM at home the way that I GM an actual play, which is a little bit different. But I find that it works well with players. They really appreciate it because they often want to be the main characters of the story. And I feel that that is the thing that most sets actual plays apart from games at home, especially if you're running a written module. Maybe you're playing D&D and you're running one of the books, or you're playing something else that is a module that either you prepared or somebody else prepared. The biggest thing that sets apart your favorite actual play shows is that in almost every actual play, if you took a step back from the story and said, okay, who is this about? Who is the protagonist of the story? It's always the players. And when you're GMing, especially a pre-written module at home that you're taking your players through, if you ask yourself, who's the protagonist of this story? It's usually not the players. They're often adventurers who are brought into a story like Mad Max, right? Like, who's the protagonist of Mad Max Fury Road? It's Furiosa, of course. It's not Mad Max. Often, when you're GMing something that's already written, your players are Mad Max. In an actual play, you want your players to be Furiosa. Maybe specifically, but at least the idea. So, we're going to talk about how to make the player characters the protagonists of the story, how to GM cinematically, another thing that sets apart actual plays, making it feel like it's a movie, doing movie things, movie story structure, movie moments that make both your players and an audience, if you have one, really feel like they are watching the movie of this story. And I have some tricks for how to make that happen. How to manage the dice. Dice are great. We love dice. We love dice rolls. Sometimes they give us numbers that we don't like. What do? I have some tips for that too. And how to manage your players' feelings. The more you make them the protagonists of the story, the more feelings they are going to have. And that can cause a lot of bleed, it can get in the way, but it can also be really meaningful to them. So whether you are just sitting around a table at home, or whether you're creating something for an audience, whether you're creating something for an audience live, there are things that you can do to manage their feelings so that they feel safe and supported, and you can keep telling the story. Okay. I say this thing here, okay. Some people are like, okay, so we're playing, I'm the GM, so I'm the writer. And then you're the players, so you're the actors, right? I write the story, and then you perform it. Well, I like to think of the players as being the writer's room. So what if actually we're all writing the story together, and I'm the producer, I'm the GM, so I'm the producer. Maybe I'm the showrunner, so I kind of had the idea for the story, and I came to you with the idea, but we're all gonna write it together, right? You know, no TV show is like one person sitting alone in a room writing the whole show themselves. That's ridiculous, it's a collaborative effort. So what if I'm the producer, you're all the writers, and my job is actually to listen to what you want to be in the story and what you want to happen, and then figure out a way to facilitate it. So maybe I actually don't even care what the story is. I just want to tell whatever story you want to tell. You come to me with an interesting idea. We're sitting at the table in session 0, and I'm listening to you talk about what you want to get out of this game, and I'm thinking in my head, as a GM, how can I produce this? What can I do to make it happen for you? So that's how I approach it. So that we all feel like we have narrative control, not just the GM. It's not cheating if you talk about the story ahead of time. Some people get weird about surprises, and I get it, because sometimes as a GM and as a player, it's really fun to surprise the table with something they weren't expecting. And there are moments where you absolutely want to do that because the reaction that you get is so fun. Not every moment is that. Not everything has to be a surprise. And you can also trust the players to act surprised when it happens in the moment, even if they're expecting it. And sometimes it can feel not fun if a player says, okay, in this session, I want to go to this place, I want to have a conversation with this person where I'm going to say this, and I want them to react in this way. Okay, maybe that's a little specific. But maybe instead your player says, by the end of this session, I want to be in a fragile emotional state because my character is reminded of the experience that I had losing my little brother when we were children. Okay, that's a specific thing and it's a specific goal, but there are a lot of ways to get there. So you as the GM, you still get to make a lot of choices, you see what happens. It can still be surprising. You're not ruining the moment if people know ahead of time that that's where you're gonna end up. And it allows you to build towards a story ending that you know is gonna be really meaningful, and allows you to give the player what they're looking to get out of the session. So it's not cheating. Don't be afraid to talk about it ahead of time. Say what you want out of the story. Let the players say what they want out of the story, both overarching and in that specific session. You can ask them in between sessions. If you want to ask them individually because you don't want to spoil it for the other players, that's fine too. If I'm doing an actual play, and usually if I'm doing it at home and it's a long campaign, I'll talk to every single player in between every session and say, like, is there something that you want? And sometimes the answer is no. Not everybody wants a specific thing in between every session, but eventually the answer is going to be yes, and they're going to say, actually, I really want this to happen, or I have this magic weapon, and we've been having this experience, and I feel like it's sentient, and I would really love if in the next session it speaks. That would be a fun moment for me. We don't have to tell the other players that it's going to happen. And you can do that, and you may not have even like thought of doing that if the player hadn't told you that it was what they wanted. It's not cheating to pause a session and ask players what they want to happen by the end. I do a lot of actual play one-shots, which are really hard because it's really hard to tell a complete story in usually 2.5 hours. Often there was no session 0. Often the player stood up with half-made characters, and you're doing it for an audience. And often the players are not paid or not paid enough. And so not everybody's starting from the same place. In these instances, it is so helpful to take a break about 2/3 of the way through and ask the players point blank, what would you like to happen in the final act of this story? That will really help you get to an ending that feels satisfying for the players and for an audience if there is one. If you're playing at home, it's still nice to do that. I do it more for one-shots, and it helps the players feel like they're the main characters because they're really driving the story in a way that you usually don't get to when you just show up for a game, sit down at the table, and you don't know what's going to happen. This relates to what Sharang was talking about earlier with, I don't remember the word that he used, reintegration of things. I do a lot of reintegration during the session. It's not easy because you have to remember what people have brought up, what they've talked about, but it's always fine to just pause and ask them, and that's a great way to facilitate reintegration without it being all on you. You can put some of that on the players. It's not all your responsibility. I challenge you to give the players permission to control their own stories, which will then make it more fun for you as a GM, because it really takes the pressure off. It's never cheating to talk to your players. This is going to be a theme in this presentation. It's literally never cheating. I don't care what other people tell you. It's never cheating to talk to your players out of character during the game, outside of the game. Literally never cheating. Okay. So, maybe, I don't know if you guys watch. Do you guys watch actual plays? Some of them. Okay. Sometimes if you're watching an actual play, you're like, wow, this GM is so good. How do they know? Like, how do they know to go to this person? How do they know what's gonna needle them? How do they know, like, that they seem to have set up this scene for them to do this action? How do they know that that's what they wanted to do? If you're watching a live show, I will spill their secrets right now. It's because these GMs are incredibly good at reading people. They're so good at it. They've learned it through a lot of practice, and they look their players in the eyes, and they can just read what they want in that moment. They have the whole story in their head, and they know, oh, this person hasn't had a scene in a while, I need to bring them in. This person wants to respond here. A character in a different scene made a choice, and I see this person wanting to respond because it affects their character, and I remember what about their character would make that affect them, and I need to find a way to bring them in. And they're thinking about this on the fly. That's great. If you're good at that, amazing. Happy for you. You should GM live. What if you're not good, right? So they can tell when a player needs a spotlight, wants something, isn't okay with something that another player did. That's a big one. They can always tell if somebody starts to get upset. It makes it look effortless. But what if you're not good at reading people? We're not all good at that. Sometimes we're actually really bad at reading other people's emotions and telling how they're feeling without any words. So how can you then use the same tactics? You can ask them. It's that simple. You can just ask. If you think that a specific player might be having a feeling or having a thought, you can ask them specifically. But maybe you're really not good at reading people and you actually can't even tell. In between scenes, you can just pause and you can ask the whole table. They might not have a response then. There might not actually be something, but you can just ask in between scenes, and eventually someone will have something, and they will appreciate that you gave them the opportunity to bring it in.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific example of a question, like a generic question that you would use to solicit that kind of feedback?
Yeah. So I would, if I weren't sure how players felt about a scene that just happened, it would probably be a scene where something big happened, a big character development or a big story development. I wouldn't do it at the end of every scene. So if there were a big story development where I thought, well, maybe if I were a player, I might have a reaction to this. I would end the scene, I would shift to out of character, and I would say, out of character, I'd call somebody by their name. How does that make your character feel? is there something you want to share about how your character feels? Or do you have thoughts about how you want your character to respond to that? Do you think it's important that your character learn that information? Maybe it was a scene that your character wasn't in, and a piece of information that was learned, that maybe could affect your character, and I want to know if you, the player, care about how your character learns that. It could be a big moment for you. Maybe you actually don't care. The way that you view your character, that thing that was written in a book that suggests something to do with your ancestors and what happened to them. Maybe you think, actually, my story is about moving forward. It's not about learning about my past. So I don't care about that. And we move on. But maybe you say, actually, I really want to explore learning about my character's past and what I don't know about it. I would love to learn that information. And then I know to set up a scene where we can role play your character learning that information, either from an NPC or other PCs. We can talk about it together. Maybe another player says, oh, I just learned that information. I can tell you when we meet at the tavern later. And we can set up that scene and we can make it happen. Okay. What if you love to plan? A lot of this stuff is kind of like making choices on the fly, doing things because something comes up and now you change things. And what if you're a GM who just loves to plan everything? How can you still make the player characters the main characters? Planning is amazing. It's great. I often don't do it. I should do it more. It's great. What if you planned together? What if instead of you, by yourself, planned a session for them all to experience, what if you did that planning together? And it doesn't have to be at the table. What if you had a Discord call, you know? Maybe you have an hour free the same evening. What if you chatted on Discord and you planned it together? You still might have to make some changes. If you really want to bring the players into the story, you have to be ready to deviate from your plan on the fly and not be too precious about it. However, this came up in Sharang's presentation earlier, like, what if you spend a lot of time planning an encounter and then your players decide they want to go somewhere else? You can make that encounter in the other location. It seems obvious. It doesn't always work perfectly, but usually the stuff that you put a lot of work into, like if you reskin it, you could take all the numbers, and maybe there are monsters, I don't know what game you're playing. If you reskin it a little bit, you can just set it in the other location and your players will literally never know. They'll just think, wow, they're so prepared, they have something for everything. No, it's not, but it's not cheating, it's never cheating. There is no cheating. Take every opportunity to change things that you've planned to make them more specific to the players. You can reskin stuff so that it fits into your players' specific backstories or their specific desires. And you're using what you planned, but you're making them more connected to it. The very first game that I GM'd on stream was for an Extra Life charity event. It was not a professional thing, it was just with my friends, we were starting out, and we were doing 24 hours of streaming, and so I had the 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. slot, which is really tough for an RPG. So we played Crash Pandas, which is a one-page RPG, you don't really have to know the rules, there are very few of them. And you play with Hot Wheels, that's the game, you play with Hot Wheels. And so I was the GM. We were about a third of the way into the game, so it was like 1:45. We were so tired. I was exhausted. My brain was going. My memory was terrible. The players are raccoons who are racing. This is the game, Crash Pandas. It's really good. And so we get to this big race, and the villain, the main villain of the game, is showing up in his car, and he has his henchmen. And I described the villain stepping out of the car and the henchman, and one of the players turns to me and says, "Is the henchman K9?" Who's K9? It's clear from the way he says it that this is part of his backstory, and I've completely forgotten it because it's almost 2 a.m. He says, "Is the henchman K9?" And I say, Yes. What am I gonna do? Say no? Why would I do that? Why would I not bring in this character's backstory more into the story? So then he gets so excited and he starts describing when he locks eyes with a dog in a cop uniform. Okay, now it makes sense. K9 is his ex-partner when he used to be the only raccoon on the police force. His partner was a dog named K9, and he was a corrupt cop who burned him. Okay, now, not only do I have more fodder to put into my story, I have the same main villain, but now his henchman is a corrupt cop dog. Great. This player is now so much more engaged in this story that's happening at 2 a.m. because it's now about him and it's a story of revenge and redemption with his ex-partner. So take every opportunity to just change things. It didn't matter who the henchman was. It's so easy to make it a character that's meaningful to him. And you'll find so many opportunities during the games that you GM to do that. Take every single one, your players will thank you. Yeah, if they ask, is this new person, whatever, the thing that's important to my story? Yes. It's always yes, unless there's like a very serious reason why I can't be. Okay. This makes the story a lot more complicated. Every time you bring in stuff from the players, their backstories, more connections between each other, between the player characters and the NPCs, it makes the story way more complicated. And you might think if it's too complicated, won't the players get confused or tune it out? And the answer is yes. If it's your story that's complicated, but if it's the collective story, they won't get confused. They won't tune it out. You all made it together. They know it as well as you do. So if you understand it, they also understand it. What you don't want is for you to have a headcanon that's like 6 layers deep and they only know 1. That can be really overwhelming. But if your collective headcanon of the table is 6 layers deep, that just creates a richer story with more things for them to interact with. So make it complicated as long as you're doing it together. More player-built complications, relationships, all those things, it leads to more difficult and interesting character choices. They might have feelings about NPCs that they otherwise wouldn't, and if they are then on the opposite side from that NPC, or maybe they have to choose sides between 2 NPCs and they have different relationships with both of them, it's harder for them to make choices. And if it's harder for them to make choices because their characters are having feelings, that's great. That's exactly what you want. It should be harder because their characters are having feelings. It leads to more opportunities for character development. That's what you want. They're the main characters. They should develop, right? The protagonist should develop by the end of the story. Take every opportunity to connect the PCs to the story. Every single one, asterisk. We'll get to that later. It makes it more complicated, but it's the right kind of complicated. Okay, let's talk about cinematic storytelling. This is a thing that GMs do in actual plays, where you're watching it and it's like you're watching a movie. It can be tricky, but I'm going to give you some specific things that you can do to make your GMing more cinematic. You probably know about this. Give characters distinct moments. In a movie, you usually don't play out an entire scene in the A plot before jumping to the B plot, right? You might do part of the scene, then go to the B plot, then go to the C plot, back to the A plot. In your game, every player is the A plot, so no player should be like the main protagonist, they should all be equal, but you can, if you jump away from a scene into a different one with the understanding that you'll go back, not only does it build tension in the story and make it more cinematic, but it also gives your players a moment to pause and think about what they want to do and the choices that they want to make, which can take the pressure off of them and help them tell the story that they want to tell. Sometimes as players, it can be a little overwhelming if you're in a scene with like one other person and there are 5 other people at the table just watching you, and you have to like role play the whole time, and you have to make all of your character decisions right then, and what if you mess up, or what if you don't think of something funny to say? if the GM is jumping between scenes, it gives players a moment to like write a little bit in their heads before it comes back to them to finish their scene. And you'll end up with, I think, a more interesting story, and people get to get out their fun one-liners, which everybody loves. In combat encounters, if you're playing a game that has combat encounters, it's great if you can give the players distinct things to do. And that doesn't mean giving like everybody their own villain or like their own monster to fight, because that can be overwhelming, and how can you keep track of all of that? But just give them a thing to do that is their job. It's great if the player's goal isn't kill all the monsters. Sometimes that's fun. It's exciting to have other goals. It's great if the monster's goal isn't kill all the players. This will often give your players other things, like they have to steal something from the monsters. They have to rescue a hostage. They're not all gonna be actively doing that at the same time. It means that they can have different jobs during the combat encounter, and it'll help, especially if the encounter is quite long, it'll help people stay engaged and help it feel like a climactic action scene and not like a slog. Everyone wants to feel useful and feel special. Maybe not every player is really good at fighting. Maybe not everybody has a sword. If they have something to do that they feel is meaningful to the story, they will feel good about it, and they'll be happy to sit through the combat encounter. I did one, I was GMing D&D. I was actually doing Tomb of Annihilation. It was the first 5th edition campaign that I GM'd, and there was a big fight in like a complex, like a cult complex, and I had 5 players, and I was like, there's no way that we want to have 5 people fighting an army. How do you do that? That's not fun. They're gonna get bored. So what I did was 2 people were fighting the main villain, and one of them was a warlock who summoned a demon to do it. So he wasn't even like really fighting. He was really summoned a demon, which then got to like do very cinematic things like a giant leap over a pool of lava, like demon circles, whatever. And then the other one was like punching the bad guy. Okay. Another character was leading a slave rebellion. So it's like very much part of the combat and part of the encounter, but he didn't actually do any fighting. All of his roles were to like inspire this group. Like he had freed these slaves and they were fighting back. So he would like roll to inspire them. I would have him roll for them to see like how well they did. So it was a different kind of combat. It was still rolling, it was still engaging, but he was using different rules. And another character was had been captured and was getting murdered. He wanted to die, and so I wanted to give him like a really good, fun death. So I made him a human sacrifice. So like he was being human sacrificed. 2 guys were fighting the main villain. Another guy was leading the slave rebellion. I don't remember what the 5th guy was doing. But everybody had their own role and their distinct thing to do, and they got to feel satisfied when they completed it, and they were never jealous of what the other players and other characters were doing because they had their moment. Okay, what about a heist? How do you do a heist? Heists are cool. Heists are in a lot of movies. How do you do that in a role-playing game? If you let the players plan and execute the heist at the same time, it'll feel like Ocean's 11. So, the worst thing you can do if you want to do a heist is spend 45 minutes sitting at the table talking out of character about how you're going to do the heist. Please don't do that. No one wants that. Nobody wants to do that. Just jump in. Just start the heist. Then, as you are doing the actions of the heist, allow the players to flash back, and you can roleplay planning specific segments. So every time you get to a new location, every time there's a new lock, a door, an adversary, when you get there and they see it, flash back and let them plan how they were going to surmount it. And you can also, like let each player lead a different flashback. You can take turns, so everybody is involved in the planning. And then once they've planned it, then you jump back to the scene, play out the scene. It's really fun. It really will make you feel like you're George Clooney. You can end a scene. Players are sometimes really bad at ending scenes. It's tough when you're in character to know, like, is this the cool line to go out on? You can do it as the GM. And you have different tools. You don't have to wait for the players. You have different tools that you can use. I like to do it narratively. I worked with a GM recently who liked to end scenes by having an NPC come in and interrupt the players, which in some situations can be great. In some situations, it's really funny. If it's like a more serious scene, you don't have to make an active thing happen to force the scene to end. You can narratively end it. There are like narrative tools that you can use. Motifs like the sun sets. That'll indicate to your players that the scene is now over. Nothing happened in the story to force it to be over. You are just letting them know by saying the sun sets, which is a classic ending motif, that it's now time to move on from that. There are a lot of narrative devices that you can use. I recommend that because often, like if you're thinking of it cinematically, a lot of scenes do end that way. You fade to black instead of having something suddenly change. We don't need to role play the rest of it. This is great if you're dealing with sex in games. I jam a lot of PG-13 games, so like it's cool if players have sex with each other. We're not gonna role play it. Just fade to black, right? And you as the GM, and if you're doing that, if you're GMing a scene where two players are gonna have sex, you have to end the scene. It's so awkward for the players. There's no way that they're gonna do it on their own in a way that doesn't make everyone at the table uncomfortable. So you just pick the right moment and you can literally say, fade to black. You can also say, the camera pans away and go to a different scene. Or you can say, like, the camera pans away, we follow it down the hall, we fade to black, the sun rises the next morning, right? Think of it like a movie. It's not a porno. We're not gonna watch it. But it's cool that it happens. Sometimes it's important for the characters and their stories, right? So, okay. The energy that you bring is gonna dictate the player's energy. So if you find that the table's low energy, raise your energy. If you talk really fast, that will dictate the pace of the story. If you start speaking really fast, the players are gonna feel a sense of urgency. They're gonna wanna act quickly. This will create cinematic moments. You wanna have a climax to your story. How do you get a climax to the story? You start talking really fast and really animated like this, and now your players know this is the moment. They have to do the thing. They only have a moment. What are you gonna do? Okay. If you slow it down, for the denouement, you pause for moments where you want people to go inside their characters' minds. What are they feeling? What choice are they gonna make? They're gonna make a choice based on their character feelings if you slow it down. They're gonna make an instinctual choice if you speed it up. Speed up your speech to impart a sense of urgency. Speak quietly to impart a sense of danger. Scream. You can scream. You can just scream. It'll really shock your players. It'll really surprise them, and they'll feel like they have to make a decision right now if you do it. It's fun. Just scream.
Sorry, do you mean a wordless scream, or just speaking very, very loudly?
No, I mean a literal scream. I mean, you can literally scream. I do a lot of horror games. If you want to scare, it's hard to scare your players in a horror game because they know it's not real. One of the best ways to do it is to scream. Just out of nowhere. I won't demonstrate.
After the session.
That really going to. Waiting for the shoe to drop.
Okay. Binary choices. They up the stakes and create urgency. If you have ever tried to get your players to make a binary choice during a session, you may have had a problem. That's because people will always look for a third way. This is an instinctive human reaction. When presented with a binary choice, our instinct is to find a third option, not to pick one of the choices. So, as the GM, how do you force them to pick one of the choices without telling them, hey Ken, I need you to pick one of these things, which is less fun. How do I manipulate Ken into picking one of the choices? Okay.
In a nice way.
In a nice way. I'm gonna teach you how to manipulate your players in a nice way. Always present the choice at the end of the scene. So that's because, just like in a movie, every scene has a dramatic question. We open the scene and we're thinking, okay, is this person going to escape? Are they going to convince an NPC to pay them? Whatever it is, there's always a dramatic question. If you present a binary choice at the beginning of the scene, the dramatic question becomes, how do we find another option? They will always look for a third way. And if they don't succeed, it's frustrating. And if they do succeed, fine, but you didn't do the thing that you set out to do. If you present the choice at the end, when it feels like the scene is wrapping up, and you create that urgency, there's no time to think of other options. You did all this stuff, okay, now the building is collapsing, you can save this person or this person, pick one. If you do nothing, they both die. We don't open the scene like that. We've already gone through the whole building, we did something that accidentally triggered the rubble falling, whatever it is. Now, we know the scene is ending, it's wrapping up, we're about to jump to somebody else. These two people are trapped. If you act now, you have time to save one of them. What do? There is no option to try to do both. We're already at the end of the scene. You can act or you cannot act. If you don't act, they're both gonna die. That's fine. Maybe that's an interesting thing for your character to deal with. That's an okay option. But you can't win on both fronts in that situation. I had one where it was, oh yeah, what's up?
Yeah, how do you stop players from taking too much, when you're trying to create that sense of urgency, how do you stop players from kind of out of character planning and talking
10,
through it for too long?
9,
Count it down?
8, 7, yeah, you just count down.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the best way if you need them to make the decision quickly, just count down. If you have something that makes a ticking sound, like if you have a soundboard, do a ticking sound. It makes people feel like the clock is literally ticking and they don't know when it's gonna end, and sometimes that's worse. Yeah, scare them.
Okay.
You can scream.
Yeah. I like to scream.
I was working with a GM where it was like a sci-fi space thing, and we wanted to give the players a ship that could carry a lot of people, so that they could save a lot of people. But the GM didn't want to make it easy, and so they took like their little fighter jet, and so he wanted the choice to be, you can only take one ship, you know? So I suggested that, the place where the cargo ship was, it was like pitch black, they couldn't see anything. So I suggested that you do a scene where it's all pitch black and they're trying to like get to the cargo ship, and they get the generator working and the lights come on, and they see that the entire hangar is like teetering on the edge of a cliff because we'd already established that there was like a collapse. And so it made sense that it would be like teetering on the edge of the cliff. They turn the lights on, it's about to fall. One of the ships is gonna fall. If you do nothing, they're both gonna fall and you're gonna be without a ship at all. How are you gonna get home? But you can get in one of them and fly away, but you can only get in one. And he didn't listen to my advice. And when he did it, he opened with that. He opened with, you find the cargo ship and you can tell that it's teetering on the edge of a cliff. And the whole scene became about finding a secure landing spot for their fighter jet, so that then they could get out and go save the cargo ship, and they knew their fighter jet was gonna be okay. So the whole scene was about finding a third way, which is tough. I mean, it's fine, it all worked out, but it doesn't have that sense of like urgency and the cinematic quality quality of having to make sacrifices. You want your players to have to sacrifice some things. And it's great to let them make the choice. You know, you're not trying to tell the story for them. You're not deciding if they're going to pick A or B. You're not deciding if they're going to make the sacrifice or not. But you have to put them in the position where they feel like they have to do it, because most players get attached to their characters, they get attached to their equipment and their things, and they don't naturally like to make those sacrifices, even if they know deep down that it tells a better story. So you have to manipulate them. Okay, don't let the dice get in the way of the story, but also don't ignore them. I have a lot of feelings about dice. I notoriously don't care about them. As a player, I'm insufferable because I'll show up without a character. I'll play a wizard in D&D without a character sheet. I don't like to roll. I don't like to make players roll. I think it's dumb. But people love dice. I get it. Most people love dice. And I'm not here to tell you not to use dice. I'm here to teach you how you can let the dice help you. The number on the die roll is not an absolute, but also, we play to find out. That's the whole point. We're not, it's not a scripted game. If it's an actual play, maybe it is scripted, but that's a secret. Usually it's not. It's generally not scripted. We play to find out. That's why it's fun. And we use dice to find out. We use dice to tell us, does it go well, does it go poorly, and we want that to matter. And the players want that to matter. Even though the die rolls are random and they didn't actually do anything to make that crit happen, for whatever reason, human psychology tells the players that they earned a good result. It was completely random, but they earned it. And so they want it. If they roll a 2 out of 20, they feel like they earned a bad result. And if you don't give them some kind of consequence, it's not going to feel like the story is real. So, use the dice. The die rolls matter. Somewhat. This is a dumb line. How to use the dice and not be used by them. It's like something my dad would say. He's a professor. Okay. If they fail, you can make it a success. If it really is going to be better for the story that failure is a success instead, you can make it a success with a consequence. Make something bad happen to them. Make it something that isn't the roll not succeeding. Make it something else. It can be unrelated or tangentially related, right? In that case, their failure still matters, but you can move the story forward in a way that you need to. Change the HP of a monster. You just change the HP. They don't know. They don't know how many HP that monster has. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Nobody cares. If something happens that is a really big moment and you think, actually, we might need this to not have happened, you can pause, take a step back, and discuss out of character if you need to change what happened in the story. I'll give you an example in a moment. It's not the dice results that matter, it's the player's choices that matter. The dice only matter in the extent that the players care about consequences for their actions. The important thing is their actions. That's what matters. And often numbers they're kind of ambiguous. What's the difference between a 13 and a 14? Right? There's no rule for that. What are you really supposed to do? Like, if a 13 on a roll versus a 14 on a roll, are you really going to do something different? No. What matters is the choice that the player made and that they rolled, like, pretty okay. Or if you're playing Powered by the Apocalypse, that they rolled extremely well. Does it matter if it's a 13 or a 14? No, of course not. It's their choice that matters. You can fudge the rules. It's not cheating. It's never cheating. Nothing that you do while GMing is cheating, with one exception that I'll get to later. But just fudge the rules. It's okay. If you roll behind a DM screen, they can't see it. The dice are there to help you tell the story. They are a tool that you use to tell the story. You don't go in with a predetermined outcome, but because of the dice rolls, don't let that take outcomes off the table,
right? If there's something that's gonna be great for the story, don't say, because this die roll happened, now we can't do that. That doesn't make sense. Here's an example. So, I was working with a GM, and we were doing character introductions. And actually, if you watch, it's the panic table. If you watch the panic table, it's in episode 1. So we're doing character introductions. And we're 4 players, and so each one is happening individually. And one of the character introductions is a combat sequence, you know, and it's sort of this combat that happened in his past. And we're role-playing it, and we're rolling for it. And we do the scene, and an opponent is shooting at this player character, and he fails his save. And when you fail your save, we play a game called Mothership. It's a very crunchy game, and when you fail your save, sometimes if you take enough damage, you have to roll on the wounds table, and it could be like bad or not that bad or really bad. So he rolls on the wounds table, and he rolls the worst possible thing, which is you die. Okay. This is the character introductions. We spent a lot of time building these characters. We made props for these characters. We haven't even started the game, and the dice are saying that this character dies right now. So we paused, and the GM looked at me and was like, "What? Okay, story producer, what do we do?" So I said, the consequences of the roll don't have to be immediate. In this case, this guy was shot in the head. We had previously established that this character had a scar on his face, unrelated. What a great opportunity. I thought about a movie that I saw in theaters as a small child, which was the James Bond film, The World Is Not Enough, where Robert Carlyle's character has a bullet lodged in his brain, and that is a big part of his story and his choices. He knows that he has a bullet in his brain and he's on borrowed time. Okay, what if we did that?
He feels nothing.
Yeah. So what if we did something like that? Okay, so this guy was shot in the head. Well, he rolled to die, so this is gonna kill him. Doesn't have to kill him now. It created an incredible story for us to go on, a journey for us to go on with that character, where, you know, there was an option to say, this is what the die says, we're not gonna cheat, we're not gonna fudge it, we're gonna do it, you die, make another character. But it's so much more interesting to say, okay, this is what the die says. This is how we're gonna use it in the story. Let's keep telling the story of this person. It was really cool. Another situation, we're in a combat encounter. Every character is doing something different. One character is fighting this incredibly powerful monster, and they have a huge weapon. So it's reasonable that they're fighting this monster. They attack it, and they roll a critical hit. They've already been fighting it, so it's already hurt. They roll a critical hit, and it takes damage, and that's it. And then we go to another scene and another character. And then when we go back to the character who's fighting, he's like, okay, there's a lot going on, there's a sense of urgency, I need to leave. And he leaves the monster. So afterwards, I asked the GM, why didn't you have it die? And he said, well, it just has so many hit points. And I was like, okay, is this from a module? Do you think the audience knows that this monster's so many hit points, so hard to kill? Because they know how much damage it took. He was like, no, I made it up. I was like, okay, so who knows that critical hit from this incredibly powerful weapon didn't do enough damage to kill the monster? And he's like, well, just me. It's like, okay, why didn't you kill the monster? Just have it kill the monster. It doesn't matter that it was 65 damage and the monster had 85 hit points. Nobody cares. It was a critical hit. It's fine for it to just kill the monster. That's what listening to the dice is. So, letting the monster die on a critical hit is just as much play to find out as leaving it with 2 HP is. It's not cheating, it's never cheating. The only way to cheat at RPGs is to cheat your players out of a good time.
There you go.
Hey, please don't use that line. No, it's never cheating. If you're all on the same page about telling a great story and having a great time, nothing that you do is cheating. The only way your players are ever gonna feel like you're cheating is if they feel like you're acting in an adversarial way towards them, if you're fudging the rules in a way that makes it so that they're not having a good time, that's gonna feel like cheating. If you're fudging the rules in a way that ensures that they have a great time, they're never gonna complain. Okay, we're running out of time, aren't we? I talk a lot. How should the players feel, and when do they feel bad? It can feel cathartic, it can feel therapeutic. You can deal with a lot of difficult things that players are excited to deal with. We don't have a lot of opportunities to do this. Most of us don't get to make movies that we write and star in. You know, we don't get to act out our fantasies, our nightmares. This is an opportunity that we have to do that. You can tell stories that are really meaningful to the players, but that always comes with risks. You have to be vulnerable to do that, and that means that you can get hurt. So that's why we have safety tools, that's why we have conversation tools. This is advanced jamming, I assume you know about them. I'm not gonna go over them. We can always talk about it later. So how do you manipulate them, but make it safe? Okay, your players are always gonna control what their characters do now, and also what happened to them before the events of the game. Your players control their backstories. Don't mess with their backstories without their explicit permission. This is really important. It's an easy way to make your players really angry. If you want to change something about their backstory, ask them out of character. If you want to mess with their memories so that this thing that they remember from their backstory actually wasn't true, you gotta ask them out of character if that's okay. You can talk about it at the beginning of the game if that's something that they're comfortable with. You can talk about it immediately before doing it. It's gotta be a conversation beforehand, because anything with their backstory isn't in the implicit contract that you have between the player and the GM. Sharang talked about that too. Okay. Take every opportunity to connect the PCs to the story. Every single one, asterisk, something that I said earlier. Sometimes there are really difficult topics, and sometimes players actually don't want to talk about them. If you are starting a campaign or a one-shot or whatever, and there are specific topics that you want to deal with, like if you want to open the game with all the players' parents, their characters' parents dying, and then explore how that makes them feel, you should ask the players if they're okay with that ahead of time. You can ask them about any of these difficult topics that you might want to put into the game, and just ask them explicitly, are you okay with this? And then you know what you can spring on them later, because they've already said that that's fine. Once you wait for the opportunity to present itself, you can bring it into the story without having to worry that you're crossing a line, because you already established where the line was. Okay, what if you want to do something and you didn't talk about it ahead of time? You didn't think about it ahead of time, you thought of it now and it would be really cool for the story, but you didn't get their permission and you're worried that they might not be okay with it. What can you do? You can just ask. You can pause the game, take a step back, and ask if that's okay. If you've already said it, like you've already done it, just pause and ask them if they're okay with that happening, and if they say no, just change it. You can retcon it. It's fine. It's not cheating. It's literally never cheating. Just because it happened doesn't mean that you can't undo it. You absolutely can. If you're doing a good job of making the player characters the main characters of the story, there's going to be some bleed. Bleed is when the emotions of the character become real for the player and they start to feel real emotions. That's totally fine. It will always happen. The best way to combat bleed is to talk about it once the session's over. Sharang talked about this a little bit, like debrief sessions. Debrief sessions are the best tool for combating bleed, because you end the session and immediately come out of character into yourself, and you can talk about what happened during the session from the perspective of a person in the writer's room, instead of from the perspective of the character. These debrief sessions always need to be out of character. That's the most important aspect of them. Talk as yourself, not as your characters. It gives you the players that removal from the events of the story that they need in order to keep those emotions separate. Sometimes bleed is so strong, it has to be addressed in the moment. I dealt with this with a character death, where the player just was unprepared for her character to die in that moment. and she was put in a position where she had to make a decision, and I paused the game. This is for a natural play. I paused the game, and I said, do you need a moment to think about what you're gonna do? And she said yes, and we took 10 minutes, and when she came back, she was ready to be in that emotional space because she had that moment. So just pause the game, it's fine. Protect your players' feelings. You want to have a good time. You don't want people to be crying for real. It's always okay to step away. What if you're GMing a live actual play and this happens? What if you're GMing live on Twitch and it's clear that a player is having a moment? What are you gonna do? It's a little weird to just pause the game. It's weird for the player to like get up and walk away, especially if everybody's on screen at the same time. You should establish tools for dealing with this ahead of time, but I will tell you some of them. If you have a producer who can switch between scenes physically, you can switch to a different scene where that person's window is not shown, right? And then you can, if you're doing it remote, you'll have a chat with them. So you can chat with them. It's kind of hard to multitask, but you can chat with them off camera while you're still GMing, especially if you let two players talk to each other in a different scene. You can chat with them and make sure they're okay. Oh, that's it. Yeah, just do that. I took up the whole time, but if people want to ask some quick questions, I think Ken would approve that.
Any questions?
What's up?
So, how do you start with like producing content on like actual places? Because I want to do like podcasts and things like that. So where's a good place to start?
So I would start with finding someone else who already has a channel and offering to produce something with them. A lot of people who have podcasts, if they have like a campaign, oftentimes they will have a season, the season will end, and then they might do some one-shots or some guest spots. If you have a friend who has that, you can ask to produce a one-shot in between two seasons. On a Twitch channel, you could ask to do the same thing on someone's Twitch channel. Oftentimes people who have those channels, they produce so many shows and they would love for another person to help them with that. They would love for another person to come up with a theme for a show, to find a GM, to cast it. Even just if your job is like scheduling and sending out emails to all of the players with all the information that they have to make sure that they get everything, answer their questions. Doing that on someone else's channel is a great way to start and to establish the skills that you'll need to eventually do it on your own. Other questions? Any questions from Twitch chat?
Question here.
What's up?
Is there such a thing as like too much choice? I know we talked
Yes.
about binary
Choice
choices.
paralysis?
Choice paralysis.
Yeah. That's why I like binary choices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you're like, what do you want to do? The world is your oyster. What are they gonna do? Like, you have to remember that even when characters are really deep and three-dimensional, they're still not human beings, and they are not as complex as like people and the players themselves. So when you're presented with a world of options, like, what are you supposed to do? And often they'll just ask the GM, like, well, what do you want me to do? And then you've kind of spoiled the players driving the story. So yeah, I like to make it 2 options because it creates urgency, but you could easily just give them a list of like 4 things.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Awesome, thanks Silviana, it's been fantastic. Really appreciate it, fantastic. We'll take another 15-minute break, but Silviana, thank you so much for your expertise. I learned a lot. I can't wait to talk to Silviana after this session about
My
some
goal
of this.
was that everyone would hear at least one thing that they didn't already know.
I succeeded with me, and we're going to share the presentation with everyone through email as well, so you'll be able to get that as well.
Yeah, sure.
All right, thanks everybody. We'll open the door again, use the bathroom, eat that food, talk to Silviana, and then come back for our next session, which will be on professional GMA. Thanks. Everybody made it to the end. Thank you so much for being a part of this day, everybody. It's been a journey to get here. I want to thank Silviana and Sharang, who was here earlier. But let me, of course, introduce you to who you already know, Timm Woods, professional GM, here to talk with us about being a professional GM, getting paid to do this work. Please, Tim, take it away.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Ken. Appreciate it. Thank you. Absolutely, as Ken said, my name is Timm Woods. I do professional game master work, mostly based here out of New York. I want to start by telling just a little bit of the story of like how I got into this and what it has looked like, a little bit of this journey just to contextualize it. I don't have a lot of like content out there in terms of stuff that people would know me from, but basically I got into the hobby, I'm sure, similar ways to all of you. I fell in love with D&D probably around age 12. I think from the moment I discovered this game and had that like experience that I think kids have today with like Minecraft or something, or a lot of us had with Legos, where it's like, okay, so like I'm looking at a demo of this game, I'm trying to figure out what this game is. Oh, it changes the rules depending on whether you're playing the wizard or the fighter. And like, oh, you don't have to be fighting rats in a tower, it could be anything. Oh, it can be anything. Oh, okay, I see. And you start taking the game apart and then putting it back together in all kinds of creative ways. I think the moment I discovered D&D, I knew that I wanted to have a career in D&D. And there was no guidelines on exactly what that looked like. I was definitely trying to figure out how I could make this more and more of a part of my life. I think I discovered it at a time when my other career things that I was interested in were being a fantasy author, being a teacher. And so I was always kind of like, money isn't what I wanted a life that was doing something that I was passionate about and loved. I think as I've gone into this career, the question of whether life is, what is the role that your job is to have is a whole other question. I can help talk about that, but that's like a really interesting question of like, I aimed when I was younger to have a career that was primarily something that I was enthusiastic about, and that's what I wanted my job to focus on, not whether I was making, but at the same time I knew I have to prioritize the money that I can make off of this. So my talk is about professional game mastering and the distinction between professional game mastering versus beginner and advanced game mastering. I don't think it's an issue of quality. I want to emphasize that when I talk about professional game mastering, the only distinction that I am making between professional game mastering and other kinds of game mastering is, are you monetizing it? Are you making money or not? What makes a professional game master professional? Only are you monetizing it? Are you making money? There are game masters out there much higher quality than me or other professional game masters out there. Game masters who can provide more intimate experiences. Game masters who can provide really in-depth experiences. I'm not trying to be the best game master. I set out trying to make sure that I could make money on this primarily because I didn't have evidence that I could. I wanted to see if this was possible. And so I started trying to figure out a way. I think my first instinct was, I need to have a job at Wizards of the Coast. That's the only way that anyone has ever made money doing D&D. It's like I have to work for the company, the one company. And I was starting to realize how difficult this would be, how there weren't as many jobs as I thought maybe out there, and that I had to start getting creative in like, if I do want to make money at this, I have to figure out what that is going to look like exactly. I had gotten the idea that if I worked in the retail level of like Dungeons and Dragons, the hobby, that would help me out. And so I got a job at Forbidden Planet on Union Square, and I worked there for about a year and a half, and at some point started printing out business cards and handing them out there. I did that because on average, once a day at this comic book shop, somebody would come in and say, so it wasn't every day, but it was on average one person per day. I was the guy who would talk to everybody about D&D. If you gave me the chance, I would just broach the subject, start asking, and very often I sold beginner boxes very well while I was there. But every day I would meet somebody who was like, I've always wanted to play D&D, but I never had a friend to teach me. I guess I never will. Anyway, bye. And that was the conversation very often. And very often I could sell a beginner box to that person, but at the end of the day, it was very obvious to me that there was a demand for this. And I started printing out business cards. I started handing them out. The first person who was interested was a mom who was trying to get a birthday party together for her son, who was in 4th grade at the time, and he really was getting into D&D. but like many kids at that age, didn't really know how to like bite off a piece that he could, chew of this hobby, was just kind of like floundering around. And when I handed her my card and said, she said, do you know anyone who would like, I'm trying to do a D&D birthday party for my son. I go, well, actually, ma'am, and I handed my business card. She said, oh, good. I've been looking for someone like you for like 6 months now. At this point, I had the idea to be a professional game master for maybe 4 months. So I didn't come up with this. I never did. I had never heard of a professional game master before I decided to start making business cards. They did exist. I'd never heard of them. But the point is, the customer base already wanted this. There was already demand, both within the hobby, but especially outside of the hobby, for people who wanted professional game masters long before I think that we in the hobby were really formulating this as an idea. I started running birthday parties, started running after school programs, started running all kinds of different games with companies and stuff. Since that journey began, I have done work with the United States Navy, a very unusual client where they were trying to do game design work for like their like nuclear submarines, and like they were trying to use games as training, so they were bringing in game experts. I just got back from San Francisco talking to cybersecurity companies about using games in their training. I got to work with a sports podcast who the guys there knew nothing about D&D, but they understood games, they understood how to make funny content, they immediately started killing each other in D&D. Their fans loved it. I'm like, you guys are geniuses actually. If you play the game bad, like their audience actually thought that was hilarious and would chat them like, just do the quest, Tim's giving you a quest, and they're like, no, we're gonna kill each other. I'm like, these guys know how to like make good content for you guys. And I was asked by A24 Studios to make the Green Knight tabletop role-playing game in concert with the release of their movie, The Green Knight. So it has been very much a journey of starting to run games and then finding out what companies and groups are interested in the kind of game design and game running that I'm doing. And it's been probably, if there's insight that I want to be able to impart to all of you, it's ideas on where I have found you can monetize this hobby and where I have found you can't. So I went in with an idea of I want a game master, and I thought I knew what that would look like doing it professionally, but I have had to lean more into one kind of game mastering that I could monetize and away from other things that I wasn't able to monetize. Extreme examples I would give are, I have not found a way to monetize just coming up with ideas for D&D. That's obviously an extreme example. If you know how to monetize that, please let me know. I would love a job just coming up with cool D&D ideas and letting other people execute on those ideas. I think we all understand that's a hard thing to monetize, versus teaching people outside the hobby the game for the first time. That became something that is very monetizable. And so those are extremes of like what people like to do about game mastering. Brainstorming, hard to monetize. Teaching, viewing it as a teaching enterprise, that's where I probably ultimately had the most success. I want to take a moment now at this point, just because we are a very small, very intimate group. I want to make sure that when I talk to you all, first of all, same as with Silviana, I would like this to always be question and answer. We don't need to go into a question and answer stage at the end. If at any point I say anything that you have questions about, feel free to raise a hand. I will definitely be calling upon people. And I want to make sure that I cater all of this to what you all are hoping to get out of this. I'm wondering, you're all here at the Professional Game Mastering Talk, in the sense of what I'm talking about is monetizing the hobby. What are people, and I would love to hear from everybody, even just 1 or 2 sentences possibly, and if you don't want to talk, you don't have to, I'll just jump around, but what are people hoping to be able to get paid to do within this hobby? If you're here listening to me right now, what is the thing that you would like to do within this hobby that you would like to figure out a way to monetize? And there's going to be certain answers that I will be like, I can't help you with that. But then there's other things that I would like to be able to say, yes, I have found ways to maybe monetize that. Is there anyone who wants to say what they are hoping to be able to do in the hobby to possibly make money for themselves? Yeah.
Storytelling.
Storytelling, absolutely. Telling stories 100%. So let me start with that actually. I really like that one. I have found that on one hand, the instinct that I had that came out of wanting to be a fantasy author, to create stories, I don't feel like I necessarily get to, in the same way that a lot of game masters, almost like with their players, get to create these very artistically rewarding and fulfilling custom boutique games. I don't think I get to do that as much as when I set out on this career path. I was like, I'm gonna create all my own games. Very often I'm running modules and stuff. Very often I'm running games that people kind of were like, we want to do an evil campaign and we want it to kind of look like this. And I'm like, all right, I can create the thing that you're asking for me, like in a kind of engineer's way where you get told what you need to make and then you just gotta problem solve and figure that out. I feel like I haven't quite figured out a way necessarily to monetize taking my own stories and getting to put them out there necessarily, versus I don't want to say that I don't do that, because I think that I compare what I do a lot more to teaching, and there is an element of storytelling, right, in teaching. The element of creating stories with people, I do get to do that as my job. But what an author does, which is I think where I came at game mastering from, I don't get to do that as much. My monetization relies on working with people, and the isolating parts, the more solo parts of game mastering, I don't get to focus on them as much as maybe I thought I would at the beginning of this career path. Does that kind of shed some light on that? Anybody else talking? Yeah.
Design content.
Design content, absolutely, 100%. I have definitely gotten to create content in terms of working with A24 Studios to design their game. That was definitely a moment where I got to do that sort of design work. I think that in that sense, I was doing something, I got kind of alley-ooped from what I was doing running games for people to then doing game design with them. And in that sense, I was prepared because I ran so much D&D with people. I could see D&D like the Matrix. Like I'm able to take this thing apart, put it back together. I understand this game so well that then it translated to me being able to run other games or design other games. But I do think these are two fairly distinct things for sure. Professional game mastering gave me much more insight into game design. It helped me to be a better game designer, and it did lead to opportunities of game design. I do think that in that sense, they are related 100%. But I do also think that content design, like I know the kind that you're doing, I would almost call that a different kind of focus, perhaps. Yeah.
I'd be really interested in making RPGs more accessible to people who don't see themselves as like an RPG person.
Okay.
So like for example, I am super new to RPGs. I played my first D&D game, like 2 weeks ago? And I really enjoyed it, but
That's awesome.
It never felt accessible. And I think that we are starting to see this trend, especially with the D&D movie, that I think a lot of people got dragged to by their friends and realized that, you know, it was pretty cool. But I think that professional DMs especially are in like a really good position to try to bring people in and show that RPGs can be so much more than D&D.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in on this one in particular because of the three things we brought up so far. This is the one that is very monetizable. 100%, I couldn't agree more. I think that if professional game masters are here for one thing, it is introducing people outside the hobby into the TTRPG hobby. I always tell people there's this many people who play D&D, right? Well, guess what? There's this many people who want to play D&D and feel like they can't, despite the fact that they're being told online when they Google this, go to this weekly, like they're being told there are opportunities. They're still not taking them. They're still not feeling, like they're told a Wednesday group meets every day at this gaming shop down the block from you. They still won't show up, and having run those weekly games at game shops, I can't tell them they're wrong for turning down that opportunity. All it takes is one or two toxic people in those communities to really make, Ben and me were coworkers, and so it does not take much to really shut down one of those otherwise amazing communities. And so people, and then I see the internet conversations just kind of being like, well, you just don't want to take it, it is available. It's like, no, if they don't want to take that bait, then it's not available to them actually. And I do think there is a much larger demographic, a larger quantity of people who are outside the hobby trying to get in than even at the biggest the hobby has ever been. That amount of people who are playing right now, and it's so many people, it's still a larger quantity who feel outside in the cold, left out, and who want to give it a try. They're not banging at the door either. They're just kind of feeling like, oh, I always wanted to play that game, I guess I never will. It's the people I would meet at the comic book shop who just, it's not a big deal to them. They just also, and that's how so many people get into the hobby, is not, I am somebody who read the rule books as a kid, and that's how I got into the hobby. That is such a far minority of people get into the hobby that way. Most people get into the hobby through a friend. As a professional game master, I am that friend. That's the job in a nutshell, is bringing people into the hobby, making them feel welcome. I want to go off of something Silviana said, which is that the reading the room, good game masters can read the room very well. I think that's the number one skill of professional game masters. I call it the number one skill for a professional game master, in particular a professional, is the insight check. That's the skill that you need to have down. You need to, because very often, yes, I want to use safety tools and I want to hand out questionnaires. I want to do all the things to make sure I'm providing the exact experience that they want, but sometimes, often, I would say new players don't have the vocabulary to say exactly what they want. They don't know what the game is, so they don't know how to specify what they want, and they're gonna be very confused about the questions that they're being asked until they have played the game a little bit. So that can be a very overwhelming place to start. As a game master, I'll come in, do the insight check, and be like, this person does not understand what we're doing here. I need to make sure that I meet them where they're at. I would say with my groups, about 50% of the people will not only have never played D&D in the group before, they will feel like they are not even really, they're like, I'm just gonna be here. I won't be a D&D player at the end of this. I'll just be someone who came along for the ride, kind of. Usually in a group of 6, there'll be one person who, if they were being honest, would take me aside and be like, I shouldn't be here. I should go and let them play, but I got dragged along by somebody to this, and I'm just gonna tolerate it. I'm not expecting to have fun, but I don't wanna ruin the fun for other people. That's my player. That person, if I can bring them in, then the person who's excited to explain optional flanking rules to people and stuff, they're easy. I'll have them on my side if I can get the most reluctant person at the table to be excited about playing. If I can get them, then often the veteran players will be that much more excited because they'll see the person they thought they couldn't sell the game on. Once they're in, they're like, how did this guy enroll my friend who doesn't like any fantasy stuff and is, if anything, resistant to the idea of enjoying D&D? If I can bring them in, I'm going to have everybody else in the game at that point quite easily. So I think bringing in new players has definitely been the way, as a professional game master, that I have oriented pretty much my whole career. I have aimed at bringing people into the hobby because when I discovered, I went in with the idea of wanting to create my own stories and stuff. What I discovered was I love teaching so much that sharing it with people, while it can be very repetitive to play with new players, and there are pros and cons to it definitely, sharing it with people and watching people have that moment of getting D&D became my high. It became the thing that I enjoyed most about this hobby, and so that has much more been the focus of my career than, let's say, being the best storytelling game master or stuff like that. A good example I would say is Silviana talked about so many cool tools of reintegration, talking with people before and after the game. As a professional, when I'm running anywhere from 4 to 8 games in a week, I never get to do that as much as I like. And I often have to figure out ways to do that without doing it because I can't sit down with dozens of players, but I do want to do that. Those are such valuable things to do in the game and so important for people to get to do. I have to find ways to sort of supplement that without necessarily having all my time eaten up. I think an important thing about professional game mastering is because this is something that we're all so passionate about, I discovered that throughout the question of how much prep do I do? The answer is I've been shrinking it, and I've been shrinking it intentionally because it used to be I would do the amount of prep that we do, which is a lot relative to the amount that we play. And it's enjoyable, it's so much fun, so I would do it. And then that was my 20s, was just like pouring myself essentially into my career and getting very burned out doing it, because that is a lot of upkeep to do for the number of games that I was running. So essentially I had to be very careful because I discovered that my prep could spin out of control, dominate my whole life, and then other aspects of my life would start falling apart, like any other career where you put too much of yourself into it and then other aspects of your life can start to suffer. It can be very dangerous when your job is something that you love. There are downsides to that, and the downside is you don't always check in to make sure that your life is in balance. And so doing things that I want to do for my games can be very constructive, but I've also had to be very careful in terms of I still have to regulate the amount of time I spend on my work. And when I finish a game, my instinct is, when's my next game? And let me start prepping for it right now. And then figuring out how to balance those ideas can be a very, very tricky one. But I do think that, yeah.
You spoke a little bit about your path working at Forbidden Planet and handing out cards. Can you tell us a little bit more about that path? Like, where you said you had a coworker in the audience. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Absolutely, yeah. So what I was, while at Forbidden Planet, started handing out business cards. I had started building grassroots clients at this point. To be fair, I was also in grad school at this point. I was getting my PhD in games as learning. At the same time, I don't know that that was that important to me necessarily, getting clients, but a lot of my work is with schools. So for schools, yes, that made a big deal that I had these credentials. With parents running birthday parties, that is not where their head is at. So I definitely was handing out business cards there. I left to focus on grad school and then, pursue this as a main career. But then I didn't feel 100% confident to just be like trying to get clients on my own at that point. That's when I discovered that there were so many board game cafes that were starting to spring up across Brooklyn and New York. I met Ben at the Brooklyn Strategist, and so we both worked at the Brooklyn Strategist, and I was running the D&D department. Ben was in the Warhammer department. The Magic the Gathering, sorry, absolutely, 100%. And so we, were definitely doing, more game-focused work there. I was running the RPGs there, and definitely appreciating that there are not a lot of institutions in New York that are pushing to reward people for game mastering. My experience was that unfortunately, your friendly local tabletop shops still are trying to get out of the mindset of like, well, GMs work for free. Why would we pay them if we're just gonna get them for free anyway? And you're getting the quality of game masters that you're gonna get out of that policy, basically. There was a big uphill battle in the industry, in my experience, against paying game masters for their time and effort. And I felt like working at a gaming cafe definitely helped me to build the experience of what this side of the industry looked like, but it was such an uphill battle with these institutions where they're trying to keep a brick and mortar shop running. They're not feeling incentivized to be paying their game masters necessarily. So I was already working with clients on my own at that point. I decided to do what I felt like was cutting out the middleman and just focusing on running the games directly. I do think that there is something to be said for, if you're looking to go into professional game mastering, there's the brick and mortar shops are not intrinsically necessary to this. I go over to people's houses, offices, and schools all the time. They have a better space than a space that I can provide. It's very rare where there'll be people coming from out of the city and then they don't have a place, so they need to come to my apartment or rent a space or something like that. Question, yes.
So did your career spread through word of mouth, or were you doing salesman pitches?
Primarily word of mouth, yes. The best way was to just start running the games, and then what I experienced was, and this is where aiming away from people who already play D&D and aiming towards people who want to play D&D, I had a lot of success with that. So particularly working with kids games, I found fruitful in the sense that parents would get very excited about the kids enjoying the D&D experience. It often goes better than when the kids are just trying to do it themselves. I think Stranger Things paints a romantic image of like, oh, it never goes wrong when kids get together. And actually it does highlight like, then people get mad at each other and people accuse each other of cheating and stuff like that. Kids D&D is an amazing tool for helping them sort of regulate and learn leadership skills and stuff like that. But when there's an adult in the room helping facilitate that, it goes a lot smoother. And what I experienced was running games for the kids. The parents are fascinated because they're getting away from a screen, but they like this activity just as much. The parents are trying to figure it out. In the process of figuring it out, sometimes the parents end up wanting to play. And so I would end up running games for the parents. Then the parents will be like telling their kids, I play with this guy, he tells a story, the kids want, so I would kind of ricochet between a kid to the parents, to the kids to the parents, to the kids and back and forth, kind of using those two demographics to just kind of go back and forth quite a bit. So, sorry, your question, does that answer that?
Yeah. You mentioned schools earlier, I think. Was that just from the parents being like...
That was primarily, the first schools I got, once you're working at one school, getting into other schools is easy. The way I got into my first school was a parent who is described by the principal as like, oh, she's a bulldog, yeah. And it's like, cool, I needed a bulldog in my corner who was essentially going to this principal face to face and being like, you need to hire this guy. And then I came in, did a quick interview, that they really, and that's where I do not exactly know the degree to which my academic credentials helped, because to be honest, I went into a meeting with that principal and he was just like, wait, what? Who are you? And I'm like, I'm the game guy. And he's like, oh, okay. And I started to explain to him my dissertation, basically, like why this is good for the kids. And we were halfway through the conversation before he realized like, oh, you're doing like an interview thing. And I realized he had already like hired me in his head. I'm trying to figure out the right way to phrase this, but my experience with schools was I was very surprised. Once you have something that there is demand for and they want it really badly, I don't want to say they didn't vet me, but there was this idea of like, listen, you have something that we really need. You seem like, I'm sure they did go into my background and could see like I had academic credentials and I had already worked with kids and stuff, so that kind of put them at ease. But once I realized like, it's just a school. If you were to tell a school, you've got 12 kids in your school who parents would pay this money to have an after-school program, all you need is a professional game master. They don't know where to go. They could look for days or weeks and never find a professional game master, even though in this room, I think we know it's not just me by any means. There's lots of professional game masters out there, but the people outside the hobby don't know where exactly to go to get that kind of skill set. And very often, if you just ask a random D&D player on the street, they're gonna say, you don't pay game masters. That's still, to this day, gonna be the answer that most people outside the hobby are gonna get. And that leaves them dead in the water in terms of fulfilling a demand that is happening in their schools very often.
Have you done paid online and in person, or have you found differences in how that market works?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. So before the pandemic, I never got paid to run an online game. This ties into a much larger conversation of imposter syndrome. Do I deserve this? What right do I have to be blah, 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 asking for this? I undervalued online play severely. I absolutely felt like, I almost like made this a rule in my head, like no one should pay for an online game, which is so freaking ironic to be coming from me. Like that's so wild that I still had that firm wall in my head of like, no, people shouldn't pay for it. And then the pandemic hit. And I still felt this way so much that the first group who reached out to me, and these were guys who owned businesses and stuff, they were very much part of the demographic of players I had who like knew that things were happening. This was in early March 2020. They were like, we're buckling in, and we are looking for something that we can do. We're all in different countries, so they reached out to me, and I told them, okay, my price is going to be less than what I normally charge. And then all of my live groups, and every one of them wanted to keep playing online. I was getting more demand than I had ever been getting before. I made the mistake of being like, I don't need to commute anymore. I'll just run 3 games back to back and like just keep, more games, more. And I burnt out in mental health check-ins and stuff like that. But I realized that, I told that first group, I'm like, listen, I'm so sorry, but I need to go back to my original rates because all my groups are now online, and they understood. It was the pandemic, it was a crazy time. So all my groups were now online at this point, and I was getting more demand than ever. I couldn't, and this is where I had already been kind of just being like, listen, it's not about how much I think I should be charging or what's right. The market is telling me that this is what I can sustain. I'm going to ask for this then. And so I very quickly realized that there was more demand than ever. I needed to not raise my rates, but at least keep my rates exactly the same as they had been. And now I have about 50% online games still, because since the pandemic, people kind of scattered to the 4 winds and stuff like that. So due to necessity. And this is where I fully agree with the sentiment, bad D&D is worse than no D&D, but an online play isn't. I'm just going to go ahead and say it's not as good as in-person play. In-person play is just usually almost always better, but you can't always do in-person play. Out of necessity, online play is required a good amount of the time in many circumstances, and so you can make online play good, and it takes a little bit more work and a little bit more focus, but I definitely still run online games, for the same rates, basically. Yeah. So yes.
When it comes to the younger demographic, how do you get them into the game? Like, more so, I'm asking, how do you respond to the question, what's D&D?
Oh, yeah. Okay, there's a couple of things going on there. What is D&D is a hard one to answer with words. I can give you a couple of different definitions, and I would give different definitions to different groups of people, for sure. Let me put it this way. If I really want to show someone what D&D is, I wouldn't answer that question. I would show them D&D. I think D&D is a very hard thing to explain and a very easy thing to show to people. And that's why the hobby has been as opaque from the outside as it is. When you watch people play D&D, it immediately makes sense, and it makes sense to most people. I truly believe like 95% of people, if it was presented in the right way, would love D&D. And very often when you watch people play D&D, you're like, oh, it's just a bunch of friends sitting around eating pizza, drinking beer, and having a good time telling stories. I'd enjoy that. Any explanation that is just words that I give of D&D isn't going to convey that idea exactly, unless I try to like really ignore, actually what D&D is and try to describe like this meta context of like, have you ever played a board game before? It's fun, and that sense of fun is what D&D is. If I start explaining rules, forget it. I've lost that audience at that point. I want to get back to kids in particular, how I approach that, but sorry, Ben.
Well, I was going to kind of piggyback off of that question and ask how you deal with the complete absence of game literacy when you talk to parents who don't know anything about, and I'll give you a very brief example of something that happened to me a couple weeks ago where one of my oldest friends, I thought she was a little more familiar with tabletop games than she turned out to be, and I was sort of explaining something about D&D, and suffice it to say, her response to whatever I was saying was, wait, there's math in Dungeons and Dragons?
Absolutely. You gotta hide that part. That's the part you gotta hide as much as possible. Yeah, absolutely. You slip them. And as someone who has always been humanities oriented and not math oriented, all my math skills come from D&D.
Yes,
like it really was like the spoonful of sugar that made the medicine go down. It is absolutely a great way to have that in, but you don't want to explain that in the explanation, and it doesn't really fit very well in the explanation. I mean, I think that is the media literacy or game literacy element is the trickiest part, because I won't notice when I have lapsed into terminology always that is opaque to other people. So very often that's part of the insight check in the beginning is like, if I say elves, who here knows what I'm talking about? And somebody will be like, Rivendell, and somebody else will be like, Christmas, and I'm like, oh, you, okay, come on, so elves, and dwarf, and like, absolutely, and when on the sports podcast, a lot of it is like yes-anding people in weird ways. One of my favorite quotes of the sports podcast is one of the guys goes, I'm like, your character's a dwarf. And he goes, oh, no, I said, someone's character is an elf. And he goes, oh, an elf, like Gimli. Gimli's an elf. And I go, yeah, absolutely. Well, he's a dwarf, but you know, and I somehow like slipped it in like, yeah, you're right, because he was in the right ballpark. I don't want to shoot that down. I know where his head kind of went. I'm like, in my head, I'm almost like, yeah, it's kind of like the opposite. It's kind of like the exit. You couldn't have gone further, actually. But I also see, and so very often you're trying to figure out, like, what are they thinking? And they're never going to be totally wrong. They're always like trying their best, and then you're just figuring out like where exactly is the level of understanding. And again, explaining it is never going to do it as much as playing or even watching people play. There's almost no rules I teach before we start playing D&D. If there is a rule I teach before we start, and our story begins in this town, it's like, okay, there's a D20, everything you do in this game, basically, is rolling the D20, trying to get the best number you can. Somewhere's a number on your sheet, you're gonna add it on to this number you rolled, and I'm gonna help you find that number on your sheet. Anything I'm explaining after that is too overwhelming, because they're already like, wait, so like, who tells the story? Like, they're still trying to figure out that sort of what are our roles type situation here. And so very often, that's always gonna be easier to teach by just doing it. And then they'll pick it up kind of along the way. I still feel like I don't know exactly how to verbally explain a lot of these things versus just taking it nice and easy, but like, oh, our first roll of the game. So you're gonna pick up the D20, you're gonna roll it, and then it's almost like, I say, like, you're trying to get the best number you can, and then if they roll a 1, the look on my face tells you exactly whether that, you know, how bad that is and how it's extra bad for reasons we're now going to get into and stuff like that. And regarding younger players in particular, this is a very interesting one because it is similar to how I work with all other players, but it's unique with kids because they're so sure that their own assumptions are just going to be fine here because, let me put it this way, we all play D&D when we're kids. We just don't know we're doing it. It's an imagination-based game, and we all do imagination-based games when we're kids. So very often when I present D&D to kids, they're like, "No, I got this." And I'm like, you do. You're not wrong, but at the same time, I'm going to be there to kind of jump in and be like, but you know, here's where I'm going to stop you because the rules say you can only attack once here, and then we're going to move on to, and very often it's like things like turn taking and stuff that I'm working on with them. They're very often, and this is true for other players too, adult players as well, I'm figuring out where they're coming from and trying to meet them there very often. So if I introduce a farm that's dilapidated, and the hint is that there's like goblins over this way who attack this farm, but then they start going, I start rebuilding the walls of the farm, and I go, are we playing Minecraft by any chance here? I think we are. I think I see what's good. They start doing crops and stuff, and they start like, that sort of growth mentality associated with Minecraft where it's like, now I'm building stuff here, and I go like, okay, and I don't try to dissuade them from doing that. However they want to approach the game, kids in particular, that's the right way to approach the game. So kids have taught me a lot of like letting go of whatever my script was ahead of time. They will very often know that I've created a script ahead of time. They'll say out loud, I don't like that story. Let's do this one instead. And I'm just like, there is the opportunity for me to be like, actually, I prepared this story. And to kind of talk them through that human experience of like, I'm, doing this and maybe we could all do this together. But very often, especially if it's their first game, I'll learn what the game is going to be about today from them. I'll start my script of like Lost Mines of Phandelver, just like, all right, you get to this town. And then they'll be like, wait, there's woods nearby? Oh, I'm going to go tame some wolves. And I'm like, okay, so today isn't about my adventure. Today's going to be about taming wolves. And then as soon as I know what they want to do, I say, what's difficult about that? Where is the challenge going to be? Just where's the dice roll? I'm looking for a dice roll here. The dice roll would be find the wolves first. Okay, perception or survival check. You found wolves. Let's roll for how many. And that's when the kids get really into it because they're like, oh, a mama wolf and a dad. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, I guess so. We'll like roll for the genders of the wolves, I guess, see how many wolves they found, and then they will try to tame those wolves, and we'll just spend the whole session doing whatever they want to do. It's very much a playground for them. And then at some point they'll be like, right, there was a quest. I'm like, there was a quest, absolutely, and now you can go do that. And they start to appreciate that, oh, the story kind of opens up a little bit more when you do what you're kind of supposed to be doing, even though I wasn't punishing them for going off the rails or something like that. My favorite example is there was a kid, probably one of the youngest students I've ever worked with. It was at a school that was definitely for kids on the spectrum, and he was one of my kids maybe further on the spectrum than some of the other kids. He was, I believe, only in 2nd grade, and I believe you can do D&D with a kid as long as they can talk. They can play D&D. The question is, how many rules are you going to use? So D&D can be played without any dice rolls, definitely. You can just strip away all the rules. It's not D&D anymore, but it is something that you can do with kids for sure. And so that's very often what I'm going to do with them. And I had this kid start to, he was a rogue, a halfling rogue named Train. And he said, I'm going to build a train. And rather than say, for my first thought was, how are you going to build a train? Second thought is, trains don't exist in this world. So my third thought was, hey, just so you know, you'll be building the first train ever made. Are you ready to invent the first train? And he goes, absolutely. I'm like, also, I guess you'll be inventing the first tracks. There's not going to be a lot of places this train can go first, but you'll be building those too. And he's like, yeah, let's go. This kid was obsessed with trains, I could tell. But I was also like, cool, we'll do this. But your friends are going, and I kept trying to urge him to work with his friends. I wasn't trying to dissuade him, but I was like, they keep going into the cave and fighting these goblins and stuff. And he turned to me, and he said, clearly communicating this, I know you want me to go into the cave with them and fight the goblins, but what I want to do is build a train. And then, quote unquote, I'm going to retire. Such clear intention, I am not here to tell him he's playing right or wrong. So I immediately was like, that's your character arc. And then in my head, I'm like, good. I need building a train to take, before I was going to be like, roll a die, you got a 15 or higher, you build a train. Just so we could get back into the main story, but now I'm like, aha. This is the main story. So, what's the first step? And in my head, I'm like, I don't know the first step of building a train, but I bet someone at this table does. Hey kid, what's the first step of building a train? And he sat and thought, and he's like, I need metal. And I'm like, guess what? They just went into a mine. And so, as they cleared out all the rooms of goblins, he went in after them, started mining, getting the ore, built a little foundry or whatever, and he got to do his whole arc of building a train. And that is just them having their experience. And eventually, he did interact with the other players more, just accidentally, kind of. It is, kids very often, I will say, don't want to cooperate. Their favorite way to play D&D is like, hey Tim, could we just kick all these other kids out and you and me play? And I'm like, you'd like that, I know, but you've gotta play with these other people. That's part of the rules we're agreeing on today. And then, even though they get to town and they're just like, I've been traveling with you too long, I'm out of here, and they all split up, then all of a sudden, after a few bad dice rolls, they're like, all right, if the bard comes help me talk to this shopkeeper, then I will help the bard fight this monster in town that, in the gladiator arena, he's been struggling with. And so I like it because it's something that the original designers built into the game is there's no rule that says you have to work together. But conveniently, every character class kind of works well with each other and is complementary, so they literally find that out organically over time. It's just like, man, my past 3 turns have been spent eating it on this attempt to talk to this shopkeeper to get this item that I want. How can I, make this less painful for myself? And then all of a sudden, teamwork emerges organically rather than as me imposing it upon them type thing.
Do you find that D&D is the most robust system for this, or is it the brand recognition that forces you into?
It's not the most robust by any means. I think that I would agree that D&D is very often a tool that just gets used for everything that isn't the right tool for what you're specifically supposed to be doing. Point in case, I think I had a lot better results running Dungeon World, with kids than Dungeons & Dragons. And Dungeon World I don't consider the best tool for that either. I think that there's probably much better games to... I think one of the best results I had was like playing Dread, the Jenga tower-based game, to be honest. The kids got really into that and had a lot of fun with it. It was just free-form storytelling. I let a kid step in and game master that one, and all of a sudden he's like, you're having dreams where for some reason you're in World War I. I'm like, wait, what? I was locked in. I'm like, no, we can't end class. I need to learn dreams. We're World War I soldiers. This is nuts. What's the real... And so I think there's lots of tools better than D&D specifically. And it's not with kids anyway. With other clients, definitely the brand recognition. I'm not in the business of clients coming to me and me trying to talk them into playing Pathfinder instead of D&D. People come to me to play D&D because it has the brand recognition and they don't know other games exist, and I'm not trying to like push them towards other things. One exception was like, one group was like, we're doing like a 1920s themed party with a hired bartender, and like, I'm like, guys, have you heard of Call of Cthulhu? Like, you want to play Call of Cthulhu? Let me run Call, and they had a blast. So that's where my expertise was slightly more helpful. With kids, the advantage of D&D isn't brand recognition, it's that they can then go buy these fairly easy to get books, and then when they go home, their parents will be like, I don't know, he's just been looking at these books for weeks now. And then they come in and they're so excited to share what they've learned with me, because then all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, that is how Frost Giant government works. Isn't that interesting? And it's like, cool. And we're like high-fiving and getting excited about this is a shared world. And that's half the reason why I still set things in like the default Faerunian setting, is because then people can play Baldur's Gate 3 or read the books and still, like, I'm not gate locking this world. It's theirs. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a question, then I'm going to give context on it. So, have you heard of, or are you interested in being brought in as a sort of a one-off consultant for an existing group?
Yes!
So, as someone who is very often the DM, never the player, kind of like always the bridesmaid, never the bride role, often what I do is I will sometimes just straight up commission like illustrations, and sometimes I've used Cameo to hire people to play off one NPCs, and we just use that as improv. And I've intended to straight up like for groups that are running for a year or two, just hiring a temporary like theater troupe to do a little bit, and then we just like riff on that for the next year.
Perfect.
So I would love for an existing group that I'm running to like bring in a guest DM for like one session while we go to the weird clown island that maybe doesn't have to do with the rest of the world, but be like, it's like a beach episode. Like it's kind of like to the side and other stuff happens and I get to be a player for a bit and come back. So I'm just wondering if you've heard of this model, or do you think this would work at all?
I think this would absolutely work. I'll say this, what I very often get asked to do is come in and run one session, and then there's usually someone in the room who I know that's the person who's going to be becoming the dungeon master once I
can
leave.
You come back, once every 6 sessions or something like that for that? Like, does that work?
Definitely. I mean, I don't think they don't need me after I've done, like, I've never come back after 6 months to run a refresher course or something like that. Very often, there's somebody who steps in after me, whether they explicitly only hired me for one session, or whether they hired me, they had such a good time, maybe they often do bring me back again, but just as often I would say, they're like, we had a great time with Tim, and then I'll get an email like, now I'm running the game for my friends. So that's where I think there's a kickback against professional game mastering, like, well, now you're gatekeeping it behind this paywall. I feel like Johnny Appleseed a little bit, where I'm planting seeds and then D&D games kind of bloom behind me wherever I'm going. So it's like, there is this idea of they spin off on their own, and like one of my favorite experiences was very early on. They brought me in. I knew the guy who was like, I want a dungeon master, but I just want them to play with you first so that I can watch you, so that I can learn. And there was a moment in the game where one of their characters rolled a really good perception check and noticed that while they're fighting this gang in the alley, there's an invisible person on the wall watching them. So I said, okay, you, the player who critical hit on the perception check, we're gonna step off into the other room and I'm gonna give you secret information. You, the game master to be, come with me and watch how we're gonna do this real quick. So he got to see me step aside with another player, tell him a secret, and then I sent that other player back, and I talked to this game master, and he's like, oh, so if somebody hadn't critical hit or gotten a 20 or higher, they would have just never known there was an invisible person. And I go, hey, listen, they're not supposed to know. The way this scene goes default is this person sees everything, escapes just fine, they never get a whiff that they were being watched. But I gotta honor the fact that that person rolled really well. And he's like, but that changes the story. I'm like, it sure does, buddy. And that was kind of like him learning a behind the scenes moment. And I got to kind of share that with, the person who is now game mastering with that group. Yeah. Yes.
This is a very fun talk, by the way. But do you ever do events that are like RPG-ish, but not necessarily sitting around a table? I was thinking about SantaCon.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because SantaCon to me feels a little bit like an RPG.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 100%.
You are dressing up as a character, and you're doing a social event with thousands of other very drunk people, and it's very interactive, and you kind of build a story for yourself.
I love this. Yeah.
And so my idea that I guess I'm pitching to you right now is an RPG bar crawl.
Wow. Okay.
So they do things like that at the Ren Fair, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking about the Ren Fair, I think, in some ways. Not to steal any thunder, there is a fantastic event that's happening in the city now that's called Fantasy Tavern, where you can dress up as your D&D character or whatever character and go do that. So these things like this exist already.
They have like a bard band at Fantasy Tavern who plays up on stage. There's like an innkeeper, and then her like kind of dumb husband character. It's like really funny.
You guys
It's like
all been to Fantasy Tavern?
Fantasy Tavern's
Fantasy
rad.
Tavern rules.
We hired them for a lunch.
Really?
Yeah.
Dean?
Yeah.
Okay, Dean and I used to produce LARPs together, and we're talking about bringing Fantasy Tavern to other places. Fantasy Tavern is really good.
Yeah.
You should totally go. And the guy who invented it, his name is Dean, and he's chill. It truly is kind of like a Ren Fair, but instead of a whole thing, it is just one night. You can dress up or not. You can go as yourself. You can go as a character. And when you step into the room, it feels like you are in a fantasy tavern. And it is, if you don't mind me talking
No,
about
please, absolutely. Yeah.
it is not like playing an RPG session where there's a story and you are going on an adventure, you're gonna go slay a dragon, whatever. The story is you're going to a tavern.
Yeah.
That's the story, right? So imagine being your D&D character, but instead of going adventuring, you're spending the night at a tavern. There are musicians. There's drinking. You're hanging out with other people who are also adventurers, but you're not adventuring right now. You're chilling in the tavern.
And singing songs together.
Yeah.
Like shanties.
And they're like talking about adventures they've had, and you can kind of tell everyone's just talking about their D&D games. It's just really good. It's great.
Well, I was just thinking, because I'm part of this Bushwick bar crawl group on Discord, and it's getting stale.
You should take them to the Fantasy Tavern. Unfortunately, it's only once a month. If only it were more frequent.
If only.
I
There's
might come
one,
up-
there's one remaining for the year.
I might
Yeah, there's
come
one
up
on
to you
December
after
2nd.
and
That's the
share
next
my
one.
grand plan for this.
I'll also say the closest to an event that I've run like this was I definitely ran a very fancy Halloween party down in Florida where like they had decorated the whole house. People came in like all these super elaborate costumes and stuff, but I was just running D&D there. More to what you're talking about was I got asked to run in upstate New York a bachelor party for a group of players that I already ran their like weekly D&D game, and the premise was that all his friends who don't play D&D were going to show up as, I think they had some D&D experience, but they didn't play in our group. So they all showed up as different D&D characters who had been hired by his D&D character from our campaign to like, they're a villainous group essentially getting together, and we designed like outdoor activities, like we were gonna pretend to be goblins, you gotta throw bean bags at us and stuff, and it was a lot, it was trying to like, and croquet I think we decided was part of it and stuff. There was a lot, like at the end, one of the players like asked me like, if you could do it differently, what would you have done differently? I'm like, don't ask me that right now, because there was a lot I felt like I would have done differently, and figuring out what that looked like was kind of tricky to translate, because figuring out what their expectations were and what the expectations were going to be for the group. But it was like a lot of like role playing in character and stuff. By the end, we had one of the characters die, but then we said he got brought back as a zombie, and he had a lot of fun with that. He's like, now I'm evil! He's just like splashing people in the pool drunk, kind of. It was a very funny hoot, but it's strange when you're let me put it this way, it's strange to be doing a role-playing activity where everyone's getting increasingly drunk over the course of the night. So maybe the game master's getting heat stroke a little bit, and like it's a very interesting environment to say the least. Yeah.
So, speak on this however much or little you want to, but getting down to that sort of brass tacks, financial, sort of what you're really doing here. Do you charge by the hour? Do you charge by the day? Can you tell us a little bit more about what your finances look like
Absolutely.
on a job?
A very common question people ask is like, do you charge for prep? The short answer to that is yes, but I fold that into the cost of the event. I'm not here to walk people through like, actually, just so you know, I thought about this dragon a lot. Like I'm just letting them know for this many hours of game, this is what I'm going to charge, and it really, I don't charge differently. If I'm custom making an experience for players, then I've worked with that group a lot, and if they're just hiring me for a one shot, they're getting an out-of-the-can adventure that I've run 50 times usually before for different groups and stuff, and I still charge the same, but it's like that, you know, that's a group that I just have less experience with, so that's what the first experience is like. As you play with me more, it becomes more customized and more personal to some degree or another. I tend to charge for a 3-hour game, which is my go-to like default. I charge $500 for that. And then for every hour after that, it's another $200. So I do have groups that do hire me for like 5 hours, pretty much my marathon, like my longest that I will do. It's nice because that's $900, and then if people are hiring me for a 5-hour game, they're just gonna bump up to $1,000 at that point. So that's a very nice like structuring trick there. But I've been very lucky to be able to charge that because, again, reaching out to people who are outside the hobby, that is what they are. There are clients out there, obviously not most clients. I am well aware that is outside the price range of most D&D players, but for people who, especially the kind of clients I work with, are people for whom $500 is nothing compared to 3 hours of their time. 3 hours of their time is worth vastly more than $500 to them. So for them, that is, in many ways, I just have to make sure that they are feeling like their 3 hours is well spent, not that their $500 is well spent. That's how I try to think of it, of, you know, am I providing them their value?
Just to follow up, congratulations. But could you give us a little bit more information about where you started? So we can have a little bit more, like, where did you start before
Absolutely.
you got to this amazing place?
100%. One of my initial ways of reaching out to groups was to go on, I don't think it exists, meetup.com. Meetup.com, yes. Still exists? Okay, cool, awesome. So meetup.com, I would advertise on there, on like the D&D meetup groups, as a professional game master. One of the few places where I advertised online at that point in my career, and that point in our history of the hobby, where people didn't swarm in like white blood cells on bacteria, like people thought that there were plenty of people online truly believing that they were doing the hobby service by converging on people trying to charge for running game mastering and just shunting them out of whatever community they were in. Which is obviously, like, we have on Discord groups and stuff regulations against like advertising your services and stuff. But I think people are well aware, if you're in this conference, that the history of reception of professional game mastering has been fraught, and only in the past 5 years, in my experience, are we starting to accept that this is completely normal when you look at like what actors do, and like just there's so many examples of careers that do exactly what paid professional game masters are doing. So when I was advertising on meetup.com, no one gave me grief for it there, which was, that's all I was asking for at that point, was for people to not be like, Mom, burn the witch. And so I was charging $20 per player for a 3-hour game. And obviously that was a very different rate than what I'm charging now. That was where I started out on meetup.com. I would invite these people over to my house to play for 3 hours in my apartment. Not a great business choice from the standpoint of separating your work from your personal life. It was not a healthy mental health arrangement, as it were. My partner at the time, not a huge fan of like, not great people coming into the apartment and just kind of being there sometimes up to a half hour early, a half hour after. Like it's just, boundaries were not set in the best way. I was bringing in people from different, like, who were not friends already. Now I exclusively work with prearranged groups of friends who want to play D&D together. I do not try to bring D&D players together anymore. I have not had a lot of success with that. So I charged $20 for 3 hours per person. What I discovered was I wouldn't say that the more I charged, the better my players were. What I will say is that the 22 people are willing to show up and pay $20 for 3 hours just to tell you you're doing it wrong. Once you're charging more, those people stop showing up. But well within the rate of somebody who's just like, I'm gonna show up so I can tell him how I think he should be doing it. And it's like, cool. There are many things that help me become a better game master. And I don't think that, I think that the criticisms that I got, especially early on in my career, eventually I did learn from them. But just going to your players and being like, what did you like or didn't like, isn't always the best way to do better as a game master, mainly because everyone likes different play styles. And I very quickly realized, like, I'll keep the clients who like my play style. I will lose the clients who don't like my play style. Once my schedule is full, it really isn't for me about changing my play style. It's just about finding the right players and then being able to hand off the people who maybe don't match my play style over to other game masters at that point.
Final question?
Yes.
What's the minimum and maximum number of players that you have at your table?
Absolutely. I say minimum 3 players. We had the mention of like a 2-player game just not giving you enough to work with. That is very true for me. I think 3 is actually plenty though. Once you have, for some reason, it's the triangulation principle. Like you can get so much more out of 3 than 2 players just because there's that much more dynamic. 3 is definitely the minimum. I, very early on in my career, got asked to run a kid's birthday party and they were 4th graders, I think. The kid just kept inviting more and more kids, and the parents were like, we're so sorry, but guess what? There's 15 4th graders, and they put me at a table that was L-shaped, and I was at the corner, so I could either look at these kids or these kids, but not both at the same time, dead in the water.
2 friends with you.
I never, literally, I would have, and I also got the sickest burn of my career, which was the grandparents were there, wondering why this is the worst clown I've ever seen. That sucks. And one of the grandma just goes, well, it's nice you get to do what you love. I was like, what a fucking burn. She's like, you suck at it, but you're happy. The kids aren't, we're not, but you're happy. And I'm like, ooh, I'm sorry. That didn't go so well. But yeah, so I would say maximum. And sorry, I say it like only kids. I once got brought in by a company to run a 12-player game in the office, and somebody was just like, when is it gonna be my turn? And I'm like, she's kind of right, everybody, but also, like, I'm sorry, you see me going around the table, you know when it's gonna be your turn. It's like a clock, we can see this. So, I would say I can do 8. I can do 8, no problem at this point, because that just means, like, I know how quickly the spotlight needs to move. And I can make sure everyone gets like at least 2 or 3 turns each in a 3-hour game with 8 players, maybe. But that I wouldn't do more than 8. I strongly discourage that. Plenty of companies are like, oh, but you can't do 12. I'm like, you don't know what you're asking me to do, and I need to let you know.
2 GMs, 12 players.
Absolutely, 100%. That is, if they're willing to shell out for 2 game masters, that is the correct way to handle a 12-player game. Correct. Yes.
All right, and our final question.
Oh, beautiful. I feel like there's been a theme today, and you said at the top that the number 1 skill was insight check.
Yes.
Being able to read the room.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any ways in which you're deliberate about beefing that skill up? Or do you just lean on being a charming and cool guy?
I mean, I definitely feel like it's a skill I had to build, and I don't know that I necessarily built it outside of just running games for new players enough to be able to see, like, this person's hesitating, this person doesn't feel like, they think I'm not a real D&D player or whatever. No, I'm very, or especially with kids, like, kids tend to be, like, just the raw id, kind of like, as, you know, they'll say what's on their mind and stuff, so very often, kids help me figure out what's going on in adults' heads. So I'll run a game for the adults, and they'll, after the battle, I'll be like, cool, and then you keep moving on in your journey, and they're just like, and I'm like, why does everyone seem upset? And then I'll run the same encounter for the kids, and they'll be like, where's the treasure? And I'm like, oh, that's why they're mad, is because the adults were just like, I guess there was no treasure. And I'm like, you guys want the treasure, that makes complete sense. I gotta give you some, I guess when everyone levels up, and everyone gets really excited, the kids let me know what it was that was missing. The adults, you kind of have to look around the room and figure out, like, how are we all feeling? Also, it's been said a couple of times today, ask. I couldn't agree more. I think that we underestimate. I definitely have this, heard a lot, and definitely have had this impulse to be like, they must not know what happens behind the screen. In my games, they never know when they go off the rails because I'm just poker face about it. Now I realize people actually like being rewarded for like, hey guys, I, the professional, didn't plan for this. You guys are crazy. Like, whoa. And the kids love it. Adults love it. They're like, we're off the rails. We're outside the game space. And then that is my way to like tell them, I'm only human. The fact that you're paying me doesn't change that literally my brain can only do so much. So a lot of the skills we've talked about for advanced game mastering that involve relying on your players, even as a professional, I have to do those because I can only do so much. And luckily with a lot of my clients, they appreciate the limits that I am working with. And so I am very often like trying to, encourage them to work with me on those limits. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much. Timm Woods, everyone. Timm Woods. Thank you all so much for coming. Thanks everyone online. Thank you to TabletopTown for streaming this event. It's been fantastic. We have 45 more minutes to hang out, have drinks, food, continue the magic, keep talking to Tim and each other. We're going to do more of these events. Thank you all so much for coming to the first one. And thanks again to Silviana, Tim, Sharang.